creatures of darkness, welcome to today's forest story. If you're not yet part of our dark community, click the subscribe button now. And damp earth. Leave your like to feed our macabre stories and tell us in the comments which city you're facing your fears from. This was it. All because my first day as the new forest ranger in one of the oldest and most mysterious national parks in the country. I grabbed my duffel bag from the back seat and made my way to the rustic wooden building that would be my home and office for the foreseeable future. The door creaked open, revealing a cozy interior filled with maps, radio equipment, and the lingering aroma of coffee. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. A gruff voice responded from the back room, "In here, rookie." I followed the voice to find an older man with a salt and pepper beard hunched over a cluttered desk. He looked up, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. "You must be Jake," he said, standing up to shake my hand. "I'm Bill, the senior ranger. Welcome to your new home." "Thanks, Bill," I replied, returning his firm handshake. "I'm excited to get started." Bill chuckled. "Well, don't get too excited. Your first day is going to be a lot of paperwork and orientation, but tomorrow we'll get you out on your first patrol." The rest of the day flew by in a blur of forms, safety procedures, and radio protocols. By the time I crawled into bed that night, my head was spinning with information, but I couldn't wait to explore the forest. The next morning, I woke up early, eager to start my first patrol. After a quick breakfast and coffee with Bill, I set out on the main trail, my boots crunching on the gravel path. "Remember," Bill had said before I left, "keep your eyes open and your radio on. This forest has a way of surprising you." Little did I know how prophetic those words would be. As I hiked deeper into the forest, the sounds of civilization faded away, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and the occasional bird call. The trees here were massive, their trunks wider than my arm span. I felt small in comparison, a mere visitor in this ancient realm. About 2 hours into my patrol, something caught my eye. I approached a massive oak tree, its bark scarred with deep parallel grooves. My first thought was bear activity, not uncommon in these parts. But as I got closer, I felt a chill run down my spine. These marks were enormous, far larger than any bear I'd ever encountered or read about. The grooves were deep, cutting almost an inch into the hard bark. I placed my hand against the marks, my fingers barely spanning the width of a single groove. "What the hell?" I muttered to myself, my heart rate picking up. I keyed my radio. "Base, this is Jake. I found some unusual markings on a tree about 2 miles in on the main trail." "Over." Bill's voice crackled back. "Copy that, Jake. What kind of markings?" "Over." "They look like claw marks, but they're huge, much bigger than any bear I've ever seen." "Over." There was a pause before Bill responded, his tone noticeably tenser. "All right, Jake. Document it and continue your patrol. We'll discuss it when you get back. Over and out." I snapped a few photos with my phone and took some measurements before reluctantly moving on. As I continued my patrol, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in my gut. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was some kind of territorial display, multiple bears clawing at the same spot over time. But deep down I knew that explanation didn't fit. The rest of my patrol was uneventful, but I couldn't stop thinking about those marks. When I finally returned to the station, Bill was waiting for me, his face unreadable. "So tell me about these marks," he said, gesturing for me to sit down. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos. "I've never seen anything like it, Bill. Those grooves were nearly 4 inches apart and deep enough to reach the sapwood. What kind of animal could do that?" Bill studied the photos, his brow furrowed. "I've been in these woods for 30 years, Jake, and I've seen some strange things. But this..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "What do you think it could be?" I pressed. Bill leaned back in his chair, a distant look in his eyes. "There are stories about these woods, Jake. Old stories. Most folks dismiss them as campfire tales, but sometimes I wonder." Before I could ask what he meant, the door to the station burst open. A local man, probably in his 60s, stumbled in, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. "Bill, thank God you're here," he gasped, trying to catch his breath. Bill was on his feet in an instant. "Easy, Tom. What's happened?" Tom gripped the back of a chair, his knuckles white. "It's Mary. She went out mushroom picking this morning and never came back. I've been searching for hours, but there's no sign of her." I felt my blood run cold as I exchanged a glance with Bill. He turned back to Tom, his voice calm but urgent. "All right, Tom, we'll organize a search party right away. Jake, radio for backup and get our emergency gear. We're heading out in 10 minutes. As I rushed to gather our equipment, I overheard Tom whispering to Bill. "Bill, I found something out there, near the old oak grove. There were these marks on the trees, like something huge had been clawing at them, and the ground, it was all torn up, like there had been some kind of struggle." Bill's response was too low for me to hear, but the grave look on his face said enough. As we prepared to head out into the gathering dusk, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to step into something far beyond our understanding. Just as we were about to leave, a bone-chilling howl echoed through the forest, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It was deep, primal, and seemed to resonate from everywhere at once. We all froze, looking at each other with wide eyes. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. Bill's face had gone pale. "I don't know, son, but whatever it is, it's not natural, and I have a feeling it's connected to those marks you found." As we stepped out into the darkening forest, the weight of the unknown pressed down on us. The trees seemed to loom closer, their shadows deeper and more menacing. The usual nighttime sounds of the forest were eerily absent, replaced by an oppressive silence. I clicked on my flashlight, its beam barely penetrating the thick darkness. "Bill," I said, my voice sounding small in the vast quietness, "what aren't you telling me about this forest?" Bill sighed heavily, his breath visible in the cool night air. "Jake, there are things in these woods that defy explanation. Things that have been here long before us, and will be here long after we're gone. I've always believed it's best to respect the forest and its secrets. But now," he paused, looking out into the darkness, "now I fear we might not have a choice but to confront them." As we ventured deeper into the forest, following Tom's hurried footsteps, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The marks I had discovered earlier seemed like just the beginning of a mystery that ran far deeper than I could have imagined. Whatever was out there, whatever had made those marks and let out that chilling howl, I had a sinking feeling that our lives were about to change forever. Little did I know, this was just the first step into a world beyond my wildest dreams, a world where ancient guardians roamed, protecting secrets that could change the course of history. As we disappeared into the shadows of the forest, I couldn't have predicted the incredible journey that lay ahead, or the profound ways it would transform me. The first rays of dawn were just beginning to filter through the dense canopy as I set out on my mission. After a sleepless night filled with visions of enormous claw marks and echoes of that bone-chilling howl, I was determined to examine the marked trees more closely. The search for Mary had turned up empty, and the forest seemed to have swallowed her without a trace. As I hiked along the familiar trail, my mind raced with possibilities. What could have made those marks? Was it connected to Mary's disappearance? The rational part of my brain tried to come up with logical explanations, but deep down, I knew we were dealing with something beyond the ordinary. I reached the first marked tree and paused, taking a deep breath to steady myself. The morning light cast long shadows across the gouges in the bark, making them seem even more ominous than before. "All right," I muttered to myself. "Let's see what we're dealing with here." I pulled out my measuring tape and notepad, approaching the tree with a mix of trepidation and curiosity. As I began to measure the claw marks, the sheer scale of them sent a shiver down my spine. Each gouge was nearly 4 inches wide and spaced about 10 inches apart. The depth of the marks was what truly astounded me. They penetrated almost 2 inches into the hard oak. "This is impossible," I whispered, jotting down the measurements. Just then, my radio crackled to life, making me jump. "Jake, come in, this is Bill. What's your status? Over." I fumbled with the radio, my hands shaking slightly. "Bill, it's Jake. I'm at the marked tree. You're not going to believe this. Over." "What have you found?" "Over." I took a deep breath before responding. "The marks. They're even bigger than we thought. Whatever made these isn't just big, Bill. It's enormous. I've never seen anything like it." "Over." There was a long pause before Bill's voice came back, tinged with concern. "All right, Jake. Document everything and then head back to base. We need to discuss this. Over and out." I continued my examination, taking photographs and sketching the pattern of the marks. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig made me whirl around, half expecting to see some monstrous creature bearing down on me. After about an hour of meticulous documentation, I decided to explore the surrounding area. That's when I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. About 50 yards from the marked tree, I found a large clearing where the grass was flattened in a perfect circle. It looked as if something massive had been resting there, leaving an imprint in the vegetation. The grass at the center was crushed and slightly discolored, as if subjected to intense heat or pressure. "What the hell?" I muttered, approaching the circle cautiously. I knelt down to examine the flattened grass, running my hands over the bent stalks. That's when I noticed something odd. There was a faint, lingering warmth emanating from the ground despite the cool morning air. Suddenly, a twig snapped behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest, but saw nothing except the dense forest. The feeling of being watched intensified, and I couldn't shake the sensation that something was out there, just beyond my field of vision. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is anyone there?" Only the whisper of the wind through the trees answered me. I quickly took out my phone and started snapping photos of the circular imprint, my hands trembling slightly as I worked. As I was finishing up, I heard another sound. This time it was unmistakably a footstep, heavy and deliberate. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice stronger this time. "Show yourself." Again, no response. But as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. Something large had darted behind a cluster of trees, moving far too quickly for its size. My heart racing, I decided it was time to head back. As I made my way along the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every few steps, I'd hear a rustle or a soft thud behind me, but whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there. About halfway back to the station, I came across something that made me stop in my tracks. There, in a patch of soft earth, was a set of tracks that seemed to be following my own. But these weren't human tracks, nor were they from any animal I recognized. They were enormous, easily twice the size of my boot print, with strange, elongated toes and deep impressions that suggested incredible weight. "This can't be real," I whispered, kneeling to examine the tracks more closely. I quickly took more photos and measurements, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. As I stood up, a sudden gust of wind brought with it a scent I'd never encountered before, musky, wild, and somehow ancient. By the time I made it back to the ranger station, I was a bundle of nerves, jumping at every sound. Bill was waiting for me on the porch, his face etched with concern. "Jake," he said as I approached, "you look like you've seen a ghost. What happened out there?" I took a deep breath, trying to collect my thoughts. "Bill, I don't even know where to start. The marks, the clearing, the tracks, and there's something out there, something big." Bill ushered me inside and sat me down. "Start from the beginning," he said, pouring me a cup of coffee. "Tell me everything." For the next hour, I recounted my experience in detail, showing Bill the photos and measurements I'd taken. As I spoke, his expression grew increasingly grave. "Jake," he said when I'd finished, "what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room, understood?" I nodded, leaning in. Bill sighed heavily. "You're not the first to see these signs. Over the years, there have been incidents, sightings of something large, unexplainable. But every time we've tried to investigate, the evidence disappears or we're warned off by the higher-ups. Warned off? I asked, incredulous. Why? I don't know, Bill replied, shaking his head. But I've always had the feeling that something big is being covered up. Something about this forest that they don't want us to know. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Bill and I exchanged a glance before he went to answer it. A man in a crisp suit stood there, his expression stern. Ranger Williams, the man said, addressing Bill. I'm Agent Thompson from the Department of Interior. We've received reports of unusual activity in this area. I'm here to investigate. Bill's posture stiffened. We haven't filed any reports yet, Agent Thompson. How did you hear about this so quickly? Agent Thompson's eyes narrowed. That's classified information, Ranger. Now I'll need to see any evidence you've collected and speak with your new ranger. As Agent Thompson stepped inside, I couldn't help but feel that things were about to get a lot more complicated. The mystery of the forest was deepening, and I was being pulled into something far bigger than I had ever imagined. Mr. Hansen, Agent Thompson said, turning to me, I understand you've had some unusual experiences in the forest. I'd like you to tell me everything, and I mean everything, you've seen or heard since you arrived here. As I met the agent's steely gaze, I knew that my life as a simple forest ranger was over. Whatever secrets this ancient forest held, whatever creature roamed its depths, I was now irrevocably involved in uncovering the truth, no matter the cost. The morning after my encounter with Agent Thompson, I woke up with a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. The agent had grilled me for hours, his questions becoming increasingly pointed and bizarre. By the time he left, I felt like I had more questions than answers. Determined to get to the bottom of this mystery, I decided to take a different approach. If the official channels were going to be tight-lipped, maybe the locals would be more forthcoming. With that in mind, I headed to the town's only diner, the Pinecone, hoping to gather information from the residents. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, and the smell of coffee and bacon enveloped me. The diner was busy with the morning crowd, a mix of locals and the occasional tourist. I made my way to the counter and took a seat, nodding to the waitress as she approached. "What can I get you, hun?" she asked, her name tag identifying her as Darlene. "Coffee, black, and whatever your breakfast special is," I replied with a smile. As Darlene bustled off to fill my order, I overheard snippets of conversation from the booth behind me. Another disappearance up in the woods. Just like back in '87. The Guardians restless again. My ears perked up at this. I turned slightly, trying to catch more of their conversation without being too obvious. Darlene returned with my coffee, and I decided to probe gently. "Busy morning," I commented. "Looks like the whole town is here." She chuckled. "Oh, it's always like this when there's big news. Folks come to trade gossip as much as they do for the food." "Big news?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "What's going on?" Darlene leaned in, lowering her voice. "You haven't heard? There's been another disappearance up in the forest. A hiker this time. Some are saying it's connected to the mushroom picker who went missing last week." I nodded, remembering the frantic search for Mary. "That's terrible. Has this sort of thing happened before?" Before Darlene could answer, an old man sitting a few stools down from me chimed in. "More times than folks care to admit, son." I turned to face him, taking in his weathered face and piercing blue eyes. He looked like he'd lived in these parts his entire life. "Is that so?" I asked, inviting him to continue. The old man nodded, sliding over to sit next to me. "Name's Frank. Been here nigh on 70 years, and I've seen things that would turn your hair white." I introduced myself, explaining that I was the new forest ranger. Frank's eyes lit up with interest. "A ranger, eh? Then you'd best hear what I have to say. There's something in those woods, something old and powerful. We call it the Guardian." I leaned in, intrigued. "The Guardian? What exactly is it?" Frank took a sip of his coffee before continuing. "Legend has it that it's a creature as old as the forest itself. Some say it's a spirit, others say it's flesh and blood. But all the stories agree on one thing. It protects the forest and doesn't take kindly to intruders. I couldn't help but chuckle, despite the chill that ran down my spine. Sounds like a campfire tale to me. Frank's expression turned serious. You laugh now, son, but I've seen it with my own eyes. Back in '55, I was just a boy. My pa and I were out hunting, deeper in the woods than we'd ever been before. That's when we saw it. He paused, his eyes taking on a faraway look. It was huge, bigger than any bear, with fur that seemed to shimmer like it wasn't quite solid. And its eyes. God, those eyes were like looking into the heart of the forest itself. I felt my skepticism wavering in the face of Frank's conviction. What happened then? It looked right at us, and I swear I could feel it in my mind. It was like it was judging us, deciding whether we were a threat. After what felt like hours but was probably just seconds, it turned and vanished into the trees. We never went that deep into the woods again. As Frank finished his story, I noticed that the diner had gone quiet. Several other patrons had gathered around, listening intently. That's not the only story, a middle-aged woman piped up. My grandmother used to talk about the guardian. She said it only appears when the forest is in danger. Another man joined in. I heard it can control the weather, summon storms to keep people away from its territory. The stories continued, each more fantastical than the last. Tales of the guardian saving lost hikers, punishing poachers, and even granting wishes to those who respected the forest. I listened, fascinated by the mix of fear and reverence in their voices. As the conversation died down, I turned back to Frank. These are incredible stories, but surely there must be a more rational explanation. Maybe it's just a large, undiscovered species of bear? Frank shook his head firmly. No bear moves like that, son. No bear has that intelligence in its eyes. The guardian is something else entirely. I was about to press further when I noticed a man in the corner booth watching me intently. He was middle-aged, with a stern face and clothes that marked him as an outsider. When he saw me looking, he quickly averted his gaze. Intrigued and slightly unnerved, I decided it was time to leave. I thanked Frank and the others for their stories, paid my bill, and headed out. As I left, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man in the corner booth was still watching me. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine tasks, but my mind kept returning to the stories I'd heard. That evening I found myself in the small local library, poring over old newspapers and local history books. To my surprise, I found eerily similar accounts dating back hundreds of years. Native American legends spoke of a forest spirit that protected the land. Early settlers wrote of a great beast that guarded the deepest parts of the woods. And there were the missing persons reports spanning decades, all with the same mysterious circumstances. As I delved deeper into the research, I began to feel like I was being pulled into something vast and ancient. The rational part of my mind tried to dismiss it all as superstition and coincidence, but another part of me, a part that had seen those massive claw marks and felt the weight of unseen eyes watching me in the forest, wasn't so sure. Hours passed, and the library was about to close when I made a startling discovery. In a dusty old journal, I found a sketch that made my blood run cold. It depicted a massive, bear-like creature with elongated limbs and glowing eyes. The description below matched Frank's account almost word for word, but this journal was dated 1872. My hands shook as I copied down the relevant information. As I stood to leave, movement outside the library window caught my eye. A figure stood across the street, half hidden in the shadows. It was the man from the diner, and he was definitely watching me. Our eyes met for a brief moment before he turned and walked briskly away, disappearing around a corner. My heart raced as I gathered my things. Who was he? Was he connected to Agent Thompson? Or was he something else entirely? As I left the library and headed back to my cabin, the weight of everything I'd learned pressed down on me. The guardian, the disappearances, the long history of strange occurrences. It all pointed to something beyond my understanding. And now it seemed I was being watched. I couldn't help but feel that I was standing on the edge of something enormous, a mystery that went far beyond unusual bear activity or local legends. Whatever the guardian was, whatever secrets the forest held, I was now irrevocably entangled in it all. As I walked home under the starlit sky, the forest loomed dark and imposing to my right. For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of movement among the trees, a shadow larger than any natural animal. But when I looked again, it was gone. One thing was clear. I was in deep, and there was no turning back now. Whatever the truth was, I was determined to uncover it, no matter the cost. Little did I know the cost would be higher than I could have ever imagined. The events of the past few days had left me restless and on edge. Despite the exhaustion weighing on my bones, sleep eluded me. As I tossed and turned in my small cabin, the forest outside seemed to pulse with an energy I couldn't explain. Finally, unable to bear the confines of four walls any longer, I decided to do something that, in retrospect, was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. I geared up for a night patrol. The moon hung low and full in the sky as I stepped out into the cool night air. The forest loomed before me, a wall of shadows and whispers. I clicked on my flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. "All right," I muttered to myself. "Let's see what's really out there." I radioed in to the night dispatcher, letting them know I was heading out on an unscheduled patrol. The dispatcher, a young guy named Mike, sounded confused. "Everything okay out there, Jake?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Yeah, just couldn't sleep," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "Thought I'd do a quick sweep of the main trail." "All right, but be careful," Mike said. "There's been some strange activity reported tonight. Keep your radio on." His words sent a shiver down my spine, but I pressed on, determined to uncover the truth behind the mysteries that had been plaguing me. The forest at night was a different world entirely. Shadows danced at the edge of my flashlight beam, and every snapping twig or rustling leaf made me jump. The usual nighttime sounds, the hoot of an owl, the chirp of crickets, seemed muted, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I had been walking for about an hour when something caught my eye, a flash of movement in the distance. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast darkness. "Is someone there?" No response came, but I could have sworn I saw the flash again, this time accompanied by what looked like two pinpricks of light, eyes reflecting my flashlight beam. Throwing caution to the wind, I started moving towards the spot where I'd seen the movement. As I got closer, the feeling of being watched intensified. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and every instinct screamed at me to turn back. But I pressed on, driven by a mixture of curiosity and stubborn determination. Suddenly, my flashlight caught something, a pair of eyes glowing in the darkness. But these weren't the eyes of any animal I'd ever seen. They were huge, set high off the ground, and glowed with an otherworldly intelligence. "Oh my God," I whispered, my voice trembling. The eyes blinked once, and then whatever they belonged to turned and started moving away at an incredible speed. Without thinking, I gave chase, my heart pounding as I weaved through the dark forest. "Wait," I called out, though I wasn't sure why. What was I expecting? For this creature to stop and chat? I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face and arms. The beast always seemed just out of reach, a shadow flitting between the trees. Despite its apparent size, it moved with a grace and speed that defied belief. Just when I thought I'd lost it, I burst into a moonlit clearing and came to an abrupt halt. There, standing at the far edge of the clearing, was a creature that defied description. It was massive, easily standing 9 or 10 feet tall. Its body was covered in thick, shaggy fur that seemed to shift color in the moonlight, sometimes a deep brown, sometimes an ethereal silver. But it was the creature's face that truly caught my attention. It was bear-like in structure, but with an intelligence in its eyes that was decidedly un-Ursine. Those eyes, glowing with an inner light, were fixed directly on me. Time seemed to stand still as we stared at each other. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Part of me was terrified, but another part felt an inexplicable sense of awe and reverence. Then, to my utter shock, the creature spoke. Its voice was deep and resonant, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You should not be here, Protector," it said, the words forming in my mind rather than my ears. I stumbled backward, nearly falling in my surprise. You can talk?" I managed to stammer out. The creature's eyes narrowed slightly. "In a manner of speaking," it replied, "but that is not important. You are trespassing in realms beyond your understanding." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Are you the Guardian?" I asked, remembering the stories I'd heard in town. A low rumble, almost like a chuckle, emanated from the creature. "That is one of the names your kind has given me," it said. "I am as old as these woods, and I protect them from those who would do them harm." "But I'm not here to harm anything," I protested. "I'm a forest ranger. It's my job to protect this place too." The Guardian tilted its head, regarding me with what seemed like curiosity. "Your intentions may be pure, but your presence here has set in motion events that cannot be undone. Dark forces are stirring, Protector. Forces that would destroy this forest and all it protects." I felt a chill run down my spine at these words. "What do you mean? What forces?" But before the Guardian could answer, a sharp crack echoed through the clearing, the sound of a branch breaking under someone's foot. The Guardian's head whipped around towards the sound, its fur bristling. "We are not alone," it growled, its voice now tinged with anger. I spun around, trying to see what had caught the Guardian's attention. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure at the edge of the clearing, a man in dark clothing, holding what looked like a camera or some kind of recording device. When I turned back, the Guardian was already moving, its massive form blurring as it charged towards the intruder. In a flash, it had disappeared into the trees, leaving me alone in the moonlit clearing. "Wait!" I called out, but my voice was lost in the sudden cacophony of breaking branches and what sounded like a muffled shout. I stood there, frozen in indecision. Should I follow? Try to help the intruder? Or was this beyond my ability to intervene? Before I could make up my mind, my radio crackled to life, making me jump. "Jake? Jake, come in." It was Mike, the night dispatcher, and he sounded panicked. "We're picking up some strange readings from your sector. Is everything okay?" I fumbled with the radio, my hands shaking. I'm not sure," I replied honestly. "I think I saw something, and there might be someone else out here." "Hang tight," Mike said. "I'm sending backup your way. Don't engage with anyone or anything. Just stay put and wait for help." As I stood there in the clearing, waiting for backup to arrive, my mind raced with questions. Who was the intruder? Were they connected to the man I'd seen watching me in town? And the Guardian? Was it real, or had I finally cracked under the pressure of the past few days? The sound of approaching vehicles snapped me out of my thoughts. Flashlight beams cut through the trees as a search party made its way towards me. As they got closer, I realized I had a decision to make. Do I tell them everything I saw, or do I keep the Guardian's existence a secret? As the first searcher broke through into the clearing, calling my name, I made my choice. Some secrets, I realized, were too big, too important to share, at least for now. "Over here," I called back, waving my flashlight. "I'm okay." As I was surrounded by concerned colleagues, peppering me with questions, I couldn't help but glance back at the spot where the Guardian had stood. For a moment, I thought I saw those glowing eyes watching me from the tree line. But when I looked again, they were gone. One thing was certain. My life would never be the same after this night. I had seen something extraordinary, something that challenged everything I thought I knew about the world. And somehow, I knew this was just the beginning of a much larger adventure. As we made our way back to the ranger station, the forest around us seemed alive with secrets. And somewhere out there, the Guardian was watching, waiting. Our encounter had opened a door to a hidden world, and I had a feeling that, for better or worse, I was now irrevocably part of it. The morning after my encounter with the Guardian, I sat in Bill's office, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. I'd spent the last hour recounting every detail of my nighttime adventure, from the chase through the forest to the surreal conversation in the moonlit clearing. As I finished my tale, I looked up at Bill, expecting to see disbelief or concern on his face. Instead, I saw something that surprised me even more: resignation. Bill leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "I was afraid something like this might happen," he said with a heavy sigh. You believe me?" I asked, incredulous. He nodded slowly. "Jake, I've been in these woods for over 3 decades. I've seen things that I can't explain, things that shouldn't be possible. Your story? It's not the first time I've heard something like it." A mix of relief and excitement washed over me. "Then you know about the Guardian? About the strange things happening in the forest?" Bill held up a hand, his expression growing serious. "What I know is that we're dealing with something beyond our understanding, and that there are people who want to keep it that way." Before I could ask what he meant, there was a sharp knock at the door. Without waiting for a response, it swung open, revealing a man in a crisp suit, Agent Thompson, the same man who had interrogated me earlier. "Ranger Williams, Mr. Hanson," he said, his voice clipped and professional. "I need to speak with you both. Now." Bill's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Of course, Agent Thompson. Please have a seat." Thompson remained standing, his eyes fixed on me. "Mr. Hanson, I understand you had quite an adventure last night. Why don't you tell me about it?" I glanced at Bill, who gave me a subtle nod. Taking a deep breath, I recounted my story once again, though this time I found myself instinctively omitting certain details. The Guardian's ability to speak, the warning about dark forces. Something told me that sharing everything with Thompson would be a mistake. As I finished, Thompson's expression remained impassive. "That's quite a tale, Mr. Hanson. Quite a tale indeed. However, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to keep this information to yourself. What you encountered last night was nothing more than a large bear, possibly agitated by illegal campers in the area." I felt a surge of anger rising in my chest. "A bear? Are you kidding me? What I saw was no bear. It was intelligent, it was a bear." Thompson interrupted, his voice leaving no room for argument. "And that's what your official report will state. Am I clear?" I looked to Bill for support, but he just shook his head slightly, a warning in his eyes. "Crystal clear," I muttered, my fists clenching under the desk. Thompson nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. Now I'll need you to hand over any evidence you might have collected, photos, measurements, notes, all of it." "But," I started to protest, but Bill cut me off. "Jake," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "it's best if we cooperate." Reluctantly, I handed over my phone and notebook. Thompson tucked them into his briefcase without a word. "Thank you for your cooperation," he said. "I trust we won't have any further incidents. Good day, gentlemen." As the door closed behind Thompson, I turned to Bill, my frustration boiling over. What the hell was that? We're just going to let him sweep this under the rug? Bill sighed, looking suddenly very tired. "Jake, you need to understand something. There are forces at work here that are bigger than you or me. People in high places who want to keep the truth about this forest hidden." "But why?" I demanded. "If there's really something out there, don't people have a right to know?" "It's not that simple," Bill replied. "Think about it. If word got out about a creature like the Guardian, what do you think would happen? This forest would be overrun with thrill seekers, scientists, maybe even the military. The very thing we're meant to protect would be destroyed." I slumped back in my chair, the weight of his words sinking in. "So what do we do?" Bill leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We keep our eyes open. We protect the forest and its secrets as best we can, and we stay alert. Thompson and his people aren't the only ones interested in what's out there." As I left Bill's office, my mind was reeling. I had entered this job expecting to deal with lost hikers and the occasional bear. Instead, I found myself embroiled in a conspiracy that seemed to stretch to the highest levels of government. Over the next few days, I tried to continue my duties as normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every shadow at the corner of my eye, made me wonder, was it the Guardian, or something else entirely? Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to continue my investigation in secret. During my patrols, I began to veer off the main trails, searching for any signs of the Guardian or other unexplained phenomena. I kept a hidden journal, documenting everything I saw and heard. It was during one of these off-trail excursions that I made a startling discovery. Deep in a part of the forest that wasn't marked on any official maps, I found a small clearing filled with high-tech equipment, cameras, motion sensors, and what looked like highly advanced recording devices. "What the hell?" I muttered, examining one of the cameras. It was far more sophisticated than anything in our Ranger arsenal. As I was about to take a closer look at one of the sensors, a twig snapped behind me. I whirled around to see a figure quickly ducking behind a tree. "Hey!" I shouted, giving chase. "Stop right there!" The figure, a man in dark clothing, sprinted through the woods with the sure-footedness of someone intimately familiar with the terrain. But I was no slouch either, and I managed to keep pace. Just as I was about to catch up, the man stumbled, giving me the chance to tackle him to the ground. We grappled for a moment before I managed to pin him down. "Who are you?" I demanded, breathing heavily. "What are you doing out here?" The man glared up at me, his eyes defiant. "I could ask you the same thing, Ranger. This isn't exactly part of your regular patrol route, is it?" I blinked in surprise. How did he know I was off my regular route? Taking advantage of my momentary confusion, the man bucked, throwing me off balance. In a flash, he was on his feet and running again. This time, he disappeared into the undergrowth before I could catch him. Frustrated, and more confused than ever, I made my way back to the clearing with the equipment. But when I arrived, I found nothing but an empty space. Every piece of tech had vanished, as if it had never been there at all. That night, as I sat in my cabin, poring over my hidden journal, I heard a knock at the door. My heart raced as I quickly hid the journal and went to answer. To my surprise, it was Sarah, the local biologist I had met briefly during the search for the missing mushroom picker. "Jake," she said, her voice low and urgent. "We need to talk. It's about the forest, about the things you've seen. You're not alone in this." As I ushered her inside, closing the door quickly behind us, I realized that I had just taken another step deeper into the mystery. Whatever secrets the forest held, whatever forces were at work to keep those secrets hidden, I was now irrevocably entangled in it all. And as I looked at Sarah's determined face, I knew that my journey was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. Sarah's unexpected visit left me feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. As I ushered her into my small cabin, I couldn't help but glance nervously out the window, half expecting to see Agent Thompson or the mysterious man from the forest watching us. "Sorry for dropping in like this," Sarah said, her voice low. "But after what happened in the forest, I knew I had to talk to you." I gestured for her to sit at my small kitchen table. "What do you mean? What do you know about what happened in the forest?" Sarah's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of excitement and fear. "I've been studying the ecosystem here for years, Jake, and I've seen things. Things that don't make sense. Things that shouldn't exist." My heart raced. Finally, someone who might understand what I've been going through. Like a massive, intelligent creature that can communicate telepathically, I ventured. Sarah's eyes widened. "You've seen it too? The Guardian?" I nodded, relief washing over me. "Yes, but when I tried to report it, I was shut down, told to keep quiet." "Of course you were," Sarah said, a hint of bitterness in her voice. "They've been covering this up for years. But Jake, what you saw, it's just the tip of the iceberg." For the next hour, Sarah and I exchanged stories. She told me about unusual plant species she'd discovered, animals that shouldn't exist in this part of the world, and strange phenomena that defied scientific explanation. In turn, I shared my encounter with the Guardian and the mysterious equipment I'd found in the forest. As we talked, I felt the weight of isolation lifting from my shoulders, but with that relief came a new sense of responsibility and danger. "So what do we do now?" I asked, running a hand through my hair. "We can't just sit on this information." Sarah leaned forward, her expression serious. "We need help. Someone who knows the forest, someone who's seen what we've seen but has been around long enough to understand the bigger picture." A name immediately sprang to mind. "Jack," I said. "The retired ranger. He's been hinting at knowing more than he lets on." Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, I've heard stories about Jack. They say he had an encounter with the Guardian years ago." Just then, a sharp knock at the door made us both jump. Sarah and I exchanged alarmed glances. Had we been overheard? Cautiously, I approached the door. "Who is it?" I called out. "It's Jack," came the gruff reply. "Open up, kid. We need to talk." I opened the door to find the old ranger standing there, his weathered face set in a grim expression. "I saw Sarah heading this way," he said as he stepped inside. "Figured it was time we all had a chat." As Jack settled into a chair, I couldn't help but feel like we were forming some kind of clandestine resistance group. The thought would have been amusing if the situation wasn't so serious. "So," Jack said, his eyes moving between Sarah and me. "You've both seen it, haven't you? The Guardian?" We nodded, and Jack let out a heavy sigh. "I was afraid of this. It's happening again just like it did 30 years ago." "What happened 30 years ago?" I asked, leaning forward. Jack's eyes took on a distant look. "It was my first year as a ranger. There was a logging company pushing to expand their operations deeper into the forest. That's when the disappearances started. Equipment malfunction, unexplained accidents, and then I saw it." He described an encounter eerily similar to mine. The chase through the forest, the confrontation in a moonlit clearing. But in Jack's story, the Guardian had been wounded, bleeding a strange, silvery blood. "I tried to help it," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "But before I could, men in black suits showed up. They tried to capture it, but..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "But what?" Sarah pressed. "The forest itself seemed to come alive," Jack continued. "Trees moved, the ground shifted, the Guardian escaped, and the men, well, let's just say they weren't as lucky." A heavy silence fell over the room as we processed Jack's story. Finally, I spoke up. "So why is it showing itself again now? What's changed?" Sarah's eyes lit up with realization. "The new development project. They're planning to build a resort deep in the forest. It must be threatening the Guardian's territory." Jack nodded grimly. "And that's not all. I've heard rumors of a research facility, something top secret. They're looking for something in the forest, something connected to the Guardian." My mind raced, thinking of the high-tech equipment I'd found. "So we're caught between corporate greed and some kind of government black ops?" "Seems that way," Jack confirmed. "And the Guardian and the forest are caught in the middle." Sarah stood up, pacing the small cabin. "We have to do something. We can't let them destroy this ecosystem, this miracle." I nodded in agreement, but a nagging doubt gnawed at me. "But what can we do? We're just 3 people against powerful forces." Jack leaned forward, a glint in his eye. "We may be few, but we have something they don't. A connection to the forest and the Guardian. And knowledge they'd kill to get their hands on." "So what's the plan?" I asked, feeling a mix of excitement and trepidation. "First," Jack said, "we gather evidence. Hard proof of what's happening here. Sarah, you've got your research. Jake, you've got your encounter and the equipment you found. I've got decades of observations and a network of old-timers who've seen things." Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "I can analyze the data, look for patterns, maybe find a way to predict the Guardian's appearances." "Good," Jack approved. "Jake, you keep patrolling, keep your eyes open, but be careful, they'll be watching you closely now." I swallowed hard, remembering Agent Thompson's warning. What about the men in suits, the ones trying to keep this all secret? Jack's expression darkened. Leave them to me. I've dealt with their kind before. I'll run interference. Keep them off your backs as much as I can. As we continued to plan, I couldn't help but feel like we were embarking on a dangerous path. We were up against forces far beyond our understanding, with only our wits and our connection to the forest as weapons. One more thing, Jack said as we wrapped up our meeting. Trust the forest. It's more than just trees and animals. There's a consciousness to it. The Guardian is part of it, but not all of it. If you're in tune with the forest, it'll protect you. As Sarah and Jack prepared to leave, we agreed to meet again in a week's time. We'd use different routes, different times to avoid suspicion. As I watched them disappear into the night, I felt a mix of fear and determination. Back in my cabin, I pulled out my hidden journal and began to write, documenting everything we'd discussed. As I wrote, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I glanced out the window into the dark forest beyond. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of movement, a pair of glowing eyes watching from the tree line. But when I blinked, it was gone. Was it the Guardian, or something else entirely? One thing was certain. I was now part of something much bigger than myself. The forest had chosen me, for better or worse, to be one of its protectors. And as I settled into bed that night, my mind racing with plans and possibilities, I knew that my life would never be the same. The battle for the forest had begun, and I was right in the middle of it. But with Sarah and Jack by my side, and the mysterious power of the forest and the Guardian on our side, I felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. The day of our expedition into the deepest parts of the forest dawned crisp and clear. As I shouldered my heavy backpack, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to cross a point of no return. Sarah, Jack, and I had spent the past week meticulously planning this journey, mapping out a route that would take us into uncharted territory, areas of the forest that didn't appear on any official maps. We met at an old, unused trailhead just as the sun was peeking over the horizon. Jack's weathered face was set in a grim expression, while Sarah's eyes sparkled with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Everyone ready?" Jack asked, his voice low and serious. Sarah and I nodded, double-checking our gear one last time. "Remember," Jack continued, "once we cross this point, we're in unknown territory. The rules we know don't apply out there. Stay alert, stay together, and most importantly, trust your instincts." With those ominous words ringing in our ears, we set off into the forest. The first few hours of our hike were uneventful, but as we pushed deeper into the wilderness, the atmosphere began to change. The trees grew larger, their canopies so dense that only slivers of sunlight penetrated to the forest floor. The usual sounds of birds and small animals faded away, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by our footsteps and the occasional creak of ancient wood. "Does anyone else feel like we're being watched?" Sarah whispered, her eyes darting nervously from tree to tree. I nodded, feeling the same sensation crawling up my spine. "It's like the whole forest is aware of us." Jack grunted in agreement. "That's because it is. Remember what I told you. This forest is more than just trees and animals. It's alive in ways we can't fully understand." As if to punctuate Jack's words, a sudden gust of wind whipped through the trees, carrying with it a sound that was somewhere between a whisper and a growl. We all froze, our hearts pounding. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded, her face pale. "It sounded almost like words." Jack's expression was unreadable. "Come on," he said gruffly. "We need to keep moving." As we continued our trek, Sarah began to point out plants and fungi that seemed out of place. "Look at this," she said, kneeling beside a cluster of mushrooms that glowed with a faint, pulsating light. "These shouldn't be here. They're not native to this part of the world at all." I watched in fascination as she carefully collected samples, storing them in specialized containers. "How is this possible?" I asked. Sarah shook her head, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I don't know. It's like this part of the forest has its own ecosystem. completely isolated from the outside world. Jack, who had been scouting ahead, called back to us. "You two need to see this." We hurried to catch up with him, pushing through a dense thicket of ferns. As we emerged on the other side, we all stopped short, our jaws dropping in awe. Before us stood an ancient stone structure, half hidden by vines and moss. It was roughly circular with strange symbols and carvings covering its surface. At its center was a raised platform, upon which rested a large flat stone that looked unsettlingly like an altar. "What is this place?" I breathed, unable to take my eyes off the structure. Jack approached it slowly, his hand running over the moss-covered stones. "I've heard stories, whispers from the old-timers. They called it the Heartstone, said it was a place of power where the Guardian could be summoned." Sarah was already examining the symbols, her camera clicking rapidly as she documented everything. "These carvings, they're incredible. Look, there's a depiction of the Guardian." She pointed to a section of the wall where a massive, bear-like creature was carved in relief. But as I looked closer, I realized it wasn't quite a bear. Its proportions were off, its limbs too long, its face too intelligent. "Can you read any of it?" I asked, gesturing to the strange symbols that surrounded the carving. Sarah shook her head. "It's not like any language I've ever seen, but there's something familiar about it. Like I should be able to understand it." Jack had made his way to the central altar. "Over here," he called. "There's something carved into the stone." We gathered around, peering at the intricate design etched into the flat surface of the altar. It depicted a complex series of circles and lines, with the Guardian figure at its center. "It looks almost like a map," I mused, tracing the lines with my finger. Suddenly, the stone beneath my hand grew warm. The carved lines began to glow with a faint, silvery light. We all jumped back in surprise. "What did you do?" Sarah gasped. I don't know," I stammered. "I just touched it and—" Before I could finish my sentence, the air around us seemed to thicken. The faint glow from the altar intensified, spreading to encompass the entire structure. And then we heard it. A voice, not quite human, echoing in our minds. "Protectors," it said, the word filled with an ancient power that made my knees weak. "You have come." We all looked at each other, our eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. It was Jack who found his voice first. "Guardian?" he called out, his voice surprisingly steady. "Is that you?" The voice came again, stronger this time. "I am, and I am not. I am the forest, and the forest is me. We are one, and we have been waiting for you." Sarah stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear. "Waiting for us? Why?" "The balance is threatened," the voice replied. "Dark forces seek to unravel the very fabric of this place. You have been chosen to stand against them." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Chosen? But why us?" "Because you hear the call of the forest. Because you see beyond the veil of the mundane world. Because you carry within you the potential to bridge the gap between your world and ours." As the voice spoke, the carvings on the walls began to move, shifting and changing to depict scenes of both beauty and terror. We saw visions of the forest teeming with life, creatures beyond our imagination roaming freely. But we also saw darkness, machines tearing through the trees, men in suits capturing and caging the magical beings, the very life force of the forest being drained away. "This is what will come to pass if the balance is not maintained," the voice warned. "The Guardian alone cannot stop it. We need your help." Jack stepped forward, his face set in determination. "Tell us what we need to do." The voice seemed to grow softer, almost gentle. "Learn, understand, become one with the forest. Only then will you have the power to protect it." With those words, the glow began to fade. The carvings stilled, returning to their original form. We all stood in stunned silence for several long moments, trying to process what we had just experienced. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice shaky but filled with resolve. Well, I guess we know why we're here now. I nodded, still feeling the residual energy of the encounter thrumming through my body. But how do we become one with the forest? What does that even mean? Jack's eyes were distant, as if he was seeing something beyond the physical world around us. I think it means we need to open ourselves up to the forest's magic, to see and hear and feel things that our rational minds tell us are impossible. As if in response to Jack's words, the forest around us seemed to come alive. The trees swayed without wind, their leaves whispering secrets just beyond our understanding. The ground beneath our feet pulsed with an energy that felt ancient and alive. And then at the edge of our vision, we saw them, pairs of glowing eyes, watching us from the shadows. But strangely, I felt no fear. Instead, there was a sense of connection, of belonging. "We're not alone," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "No," Jack agreed, a small smile playing on his lips. "We never were." As we stood there surrounded by the awakening magic of the forest, I realized that our journey was just beginning. We had been given a mission, a purpose greater than ourselves. The path ahead would be dangerous, filled with challenges we couldn't even imagine. But we would face them together, with the power of the forest at our backs. The sun was setting as we made our way back to the edge of the known forest, each of us lost in our own thoughts. But as we emerged from the tree line, I couldn't help but feel that we were leaving a part of ourselves behind, or perhaps that we were bringing a part of the forest's magic with us. One thing was certain. Our lives had changed irrevocably. We were no longer just a ranger, a biologist, and a retired old-timer. We were protectors of the forest, chosen by forces beyond our understanding to stand against the darkness that threatened this magical realm. As we parted ways that evening, the weight of our new responsibilities settling on our shoulders, I looked back at the darkening forest. For a moment, I thought I saw a massive, shimmering form moving among the trees. The Guardian, watching over us as we returned to our world. And I knew deep in my soul that we would be ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The night air was thick with tension as Sarah, Jack, and I huddled around a small campfire deep in the heart of the forest. We had been on our expedition for 3 days now, each day bringing us closer to something. We could feel it in the air, in the way the trees seemed to whisper as we passed, in the strange lights that danced at the corner of our vision when darkness fell. "Tomorrow," Jack said, his gruff voice cutting through the silence. "Tomorrow we'll reach the place I told you about. The Grove of Whispers." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "And you're sure that's where we'll find answers?" Jack nodded solemnly. "If there's any place in this forest where the Guardian will reveal itself fully, it's there. The old stories all point to it as a place of power, a nexus where our world and the world of the forest spirits intersect." I couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and apprehension. What if we're not ready? What if we can't handle what we find there? Jack's weathered face softened slightly. "Kid, the fact that we've made it this far proves we're ready. The forest has been testing us, preparing us. Trust in that." As if in response to Jack's words, a sudden breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it a scent that was both familiar and utterly alien, like pine and ozone, and something indefinably other. We all felt it, sitting up straighter, our senses on high alert. "It's close," Sarah whispered, her voice tinged with awe. Sleep was elusive that night, our minds racing with possibilities and fears. When dawn finally broke, we packed up camp in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The trek to the Grove of Whispers was arduous, the forest growing denser and more primordial with each step. Massive trees, their trunks wider than cars, reached up into a canopy so thick it blotted out the sky. The ground was soft and springy underfoot, covered in a carpet of moss that seemed to glow with a faint internal light. As we pushed through a particularly dense thicket, the forest suddenly opened up before us. We found ourselves on the edge of a vast circular clearing, ringed by the largest trees I had ever seen. At the center of the clearing stood a single massive oak, its trunk twisted and gnarled with age, its branches reaching out like protective arms over the entire grove. "This is it," Jack breathed, his eyes wide with wonder. The Grove of Whispers. We stepped into the clearing cautiously, the air around us seeming to thicken with each step. The silence was absolute, not even the sound of wind in the leaves disturbing the eerie calm. Sarah was the first to speak, her scientific mind trying to make sense of what we were seeing. "Look at the patterns in the moss," she said, pointing to the ground. "It's growing in perfect concentric circles around the central tree. That's not natural." Jack nodded grimly. "Nothing about this place is natural, at least not in the way we understand it." As we approached the central oak, I felt a strange sensation building in my chest, a pressure, like the moment before a thunderclap. I opened my mouth to warn the others, but before I could speak, it happened. A pulse of energy, visible as a ripple in the air, emanated from the great oak. It passed through us, and suddenly, the grove was alive with light and sound. Ghostly forms danced between the trees, animals, plants, shapes that defied description, and voices, hundreds of voices, whispered all around us in a language that was felt more than heard. "Oh my God," Sarah gasped, spinning around to take it all in. It's the life force of the forest," Jack finished for her, his voice filled with reverence. "Every living thing, past and present, all connected." I was speechless, overwhelmed by the beauty and impossibility of what I was witnessing. And then, cutting through the cacophony of whispers, came a single, powerful voice, one we had heard before. "You have come," it said, the words resonating in our minds. "You have persevered." Before our eyes, the ghostly forms coalesced, swirling together like a tornado of light and energy. As we watched, breathless, the swirling mass took shape, forming into the massive bear-like creature we had glimpsed before, the Guardian. It stood before us, its form shimmering and translucent, yet undeniably real. Its eyes, deep pools of ancient wisdom, gazed at each of us in turn. "Guardian," Jack said, stepping forward. "We've come seeking answers. The forest is in danger, isn't it?" The Guardian's form rippled, as if sighing. "Yes, old one. A darkness approaches, one that threatens not just this forest, but the delicate balance of your entire world." Sarah, ever the scientist, couldn't contain her questions. "What are you exactly? How is all of this possible?" The Guardian's eyes turned to her, filled with what might have been amusement. "I am the forest, and the forest is me. We are one entity, a collective consciousness born from the life force of every living thing that has ever called this place home. As for how it is possible, your science has barely scratched the surface of understanding the true nature of life and consciousness." I found my voice at last, asking the question that had been burning in my mind. "Why us? Why did you choose us to protect the forest?" The Guardian's form shifted, growing more solid as it focused its attention on me. "You were not chosen, young one, you chose. Each of you, in your own way, opened your hearts to the forest. You heard its call when others were deaf to it. You saw its wonders when others were blind." Jack stepped forward, his face set with determination. "Tell us what we need to do. How can we stop this darkness?" The Guardian's form expanded, filling the grove with its presence. Suddenly, we were surrounded by visions, flashes of past, present, and possible futures. We saw the forest as it once was, teeming with magical creatures and pulsing with raw, primal energy. We saw the first humans enter the wood, some filled with greed and fear, others with reverence and wonder. We watched as, over centuries, the forest's magic was pushed back, hidden away from those who would exploit it.
Then the visions shifted to the present. We saw many suits poring over maps planning to tear down vast swaths of the forest for a sprawling resort complex with labs analyzing samples of plants and soil from the heart of the wood,
marveling at their impossible properties. The humans you call Thompson and his associates, the Guardian's voice echoed in our minds. They seek to harness the forest's power for their own gain. They believe they can control forces their comprehension. The vision shifted again, showing us glimpses of possible futures. In one, the forest was gone, replaced by vestiges of its magic trapped and exploded.
In another, the forest expanded, reclaiming the land, its magic flowing freely once more, humans and nature existing in harmony. As the visions faded, we found head spinning from the onslaught of information. You see now the precipice on which we stand, the Guardian said. The choice that lies before us all. Sarah, her face pale but determined, spoke of, how do we stop them? We're just 3 people against powerful corporations. Government agents. The Guardian's phone rippled again, this time with what felt like approval.
You are far more than just anything, young one. You carry within you the potential to channel the forest's power, to become true guardians yourselves. Jack's eyes widened in understanding. The stories, the legends of shamans and druids who could speak to the forest, who could perform what seemed like miracles, they were real. Indeed, the Guardian confirmed, and you 3 have the potential to join their ranks. But be warned, the path is not an easy one. To fully embrace the forest's power is to fundamentally change who and what you are. There is no going back. I felt a shiver run down my spine at these words. The magnitude of what was being offered, and what was at stake, was almost too much to comprehend. What? I swallowed hard, finding my voice. What exactly would we be able to do? The Guardian's form swirled, images flickering within it. You would become conduits for the forest's magic. You could communicate with every living thing, shape the growth of plants, call upon the animals as allies. In time, you could even learn to bend the very essence of nature to your will, to heal, to protect, to reshape the world around you. Sarah stepped forward, her eyes shining with a mixture of scientific curiosity and newfound spiritual wonder. And this power, it comes from the forest itself? From the collective life force of everything in it? Yes, the Guardian replied. You would be tapping into the very essence of life itself. But remember, with such power comes great responsibility and great danger. There are those who would stop at nothing to possess what you would become. Jack, who had been silent for a while, finally spoke up. You said we have the potential to become guardians. What do we need to do to realize that potential? The Guardian's form solidified further, becoming almost fully corporeal. You must undergo a ritual, a baptism of sorts in the purest essence of the forest's magic. It will be dangerous. It will be painful. And there is a chance you may not survive. But if you do, we'll be able to protect the forest, I finished, a sense of purpose filling me. Yes, the Guardian said simply. You will be the forest's champions in the world of humans. Its voice, its hands, its will made manifest. The 3 of us exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between us. We had come this far, seen things we could never have imagined. We knew, deep in our souls, that we couldn't turn back now. We'll do it, Jack said, his gruff voice filled with determination. Whatever it takes, Sarah nodded in agreement. For the forest, for the future. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of destiny settling on my shoulders. When do we start? The Guardian's form began to fade, its voice growing distant. Prepare yourselves. When the moon is full, return to this grove. The forest will be ready. The question is, will you? As the Guardian vanished, and the mystical lights of the grove dimmed, we were left standing in the now ordinary-looking clearing, the weight of our decision hanging in the air. Well, Sarah said, breaking the silence, I guess we have some preparing to do. Jack nodded, his eyes distant. And some goodbyes to say, I reckon. If we're really doing this, if we really become whatever it is we're going to become, our old lives are over. The truth of his words hit me like a physical blow. Everything I had known, everything I had been, it was all about to change. But as I looked around at the ancient trees, felt the pulse of life beneath my feet, I knew we were making the right choice. Come on, I said, turning back the way we had come. We've got work to do. As we made our way out of the Grove of Whispers, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Not just by the Guardian, but by every tree, every plant, every living thing in the forest. We were no longer outsiders here. We were part of something vast and ancient and powerful. And in 3 days' time, when the moon was full, we would take the final step on this incredible journey. We would become one with the forest, its protectors, its guardians. The truth had been revealed, and there was no turning back. The full moon hung low and heavy in the sky as Sarah, Jack, and I made our way back to the Grove of Whispers. The forest seemed alive with anticipation, the trees whispering and swaying despite the lack of wind. We moved in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts, acutely aware that these might be our last moments as purely human. As we entered the grove, the air shimmered with an otherworldly energy. The massive oak at the center pulsed with a soft, ethereal light. We exchanged glances, a mix of fear and determination in our eyes. "Well," Jack said, his gruff voice barely above a whisper, "I guess this is it." Sarah nodded, her scientific mind still trying to rationalize what we were about to do. "I can't believe we're really going through with this. It defies everything I've ever known about biology, about the nature of consciousness." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes, we have to let go of what we think we know to embrace a greater truth." As if in response to my words, the grove suddenly came alive with light and sound. The guardian materialized before us, its form more solid and real than we had ever seen it. "You have come," it said, its voice resonating through our very beings. "Are you prepared to become one with the forest?" We stepped forward as one. "We are," we said in unison. The ritual that followed was unlike anything I could have imagined. The guardian instructed us to place our hands on the trunk of the great oak. As we did, I felt a surge of energy course through my body. The world around us seemed to dissolve, replaced by visions of the forest's entire history, from its birth millions of years ago to the present moment. I saw the rise and fall of ancient civilizations that had lived in harmony with the forest. I witnessed the slow encroachment of the modern world, the forest's gradual retreat, and I felt the forest's pain, its fear, its desperate need for protection. As the visions faded, I became aware of a profound change within myself. I could feel the life force of every tree, every plant, every creature in the forest. Their thoughts, their needs, their very essence flowed through me. I opened my eyes to see Sarah and Jack experiencing similar transformations. Sarah's hair had taken on a greenish tint, leaves and flowers sprouting from it. Jack's skin had become bark-like, his fingers elongating into branch-like appendages. As for myself, I could feel roots extending from my feet, anchoring me to the forest floor. My senses had expanded beyond anything I had ever known. The guardian's voice echoed through our minds. "The transformation is complete. You are now true guardians of the forest. But be warned, your greatest challenge lies ahead." No sooner had the words been spoken than we felt a disturbance at the edge of the forest. Through our newfound connection, we sensed a group of humans entering the woods, their intentions hostile. "Thompson," Jack growled, his voice now carrying the rumble of ancient trees. Sarah's eyes, now a vibrant green, widened in alarm. "They must have figured out what we were up to. We need to stop them before they reach the grove." I nodded, feeling a surge of protective instinct. "Let's go. It's time to put our new abilities to the test." As we moved through the forest, I marveled at how different everything felt. The trees parted for us, branches reaching out to assist our passage. Animals emerged from their dens, offering their aid. We reached a clearing just as Thompson and his team came into view. They were heavily armed with equipment that looked designed to capture and contain supernatural entities. Thompson's eyes widened as he saw us. What have you done to yourselves?" I stepped forward, feeling the power of the forest flowing through me. "We've become what we were always meant to be, Thompson, the forest's protectors." He scoffed, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "Protectors? You're abominations. Men, capture them. We need to study whatever's happened to them." As his team moved to surround us, Sarah raised her hands. Vines erupted from the ground, ensnaring several of the men. Jack stomped his foot, causing the earth to tremor and knocking others off balance. I focused on the trees around us, silently asking for their help. Branches swung down, disarming more of Thompson's men. Thompson himself raised a strange, high-tech weapon. "I'm warning you," he shouted. "Stand down or I'll be forced to use lethal force." But before he could fire, a deafening roar shook the clearing. The Guardian itself had arrived, its massive form towering over us all. "Enough!" its voice boomed, causing Thompson and his men to cower in fear. I stepped forward, addressing Thompson directly. "This ends now. The forest is not yours to exploit or destroy. It's a living, sentient entity, and we are its voice." Sarah joined me. "Think about what you're doing, Thompson. The miracle of this place. It could revolutionize our understanding of ecology, of life itself. But not through destruction and exploitation. Through respect and symbiosis." Jack's voice rumbled like an approaching storm. "You have two choices. Leave now and never return, or face the full wrath of the forest." Thompson's face contorted with a mix of fear and defiance. "You don't understand what's at stake here. The potential applications of the forest's power. It could change everything. And that's exactly why it must be protected," I countered. "This power isn't meant for humanity to control. It's meant to exist in balance with the world." As we spoke, I became aware of a growing audience. Animals of all kinds had gathered at the edges of the clearing. Birds perched on every branch, their eyes fixed on the confrontation. Even the insects had gone silent, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Thompson must have sensed it too. His eyes darted around nervously. This is impossible. You've deluded yourselves. You're throwing away everything. Your humanity, your future." Sarah shook her head, flowers blooming in her hair as she spoke. "No, Thompson. We're embracing a greater future, one where humans and nature exist in harmony, not opposition." I could feel the forest's energy building around us, responding to our emotions, our resolve. The air crackled with potential. "Last chance," Jack warned, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "Leave, or face the consequences." For a moment, I thought Thompson might actually listen to reason, but then his face hardened, and he raised his weapon once more. "I can't let you do this. The potential is too great. Men, take them down." What happened next was a blur of action and raw, primal energy. As Thompson's men opened fire, the forest itself rose to our defense. Trees uprooted themselves, forming barriers. The earth buckled and heaved, swallowing up weapons and equipment. Sarah called upon a swarm of insects, creating a living shield that deflected bullets. Jack summoned a localized windstorm, disorienting our attackers. And I felt the full power of the forest flow through me. I raised my hands, and every plant in the vicinity responded. Vines snaked out, disarming and restraining Thompson's men. Flowers released spores that induced sleep. Even the grass beneath their feet grew and tangled, rooting them in place. Throughout it all, the Guardian watched, its presence a constant reminder of the ancient power we now wielded. In a matter of minutes, it was over. Thompson's men were subdued, their weapons destroyed or rendered useless. Thompson himself stood alone, his face a mask of disbelief and fear. What are you?" he stammered. The Guardian stepped forward, its form shimmering with barely contained power. "They are the forest made flesh, the bridge between your world and ours. And you, Thompson, have failed your test." "Test?" Thompson's voice was barely a whisper. I understood then, the knowledge flowing into me through my connection with the forest. Every generation, the forest reaches out, offering humanity a chance to reconnect, to remember our place in the natural order, and every time, people like you try to exploit it instead. Sarah nodded, the realization dawning in her eyes as well. But this time it's different. This time we answered the call. "And now," Jack rumbled, "it's time for you to forget." Before Thompson could respond, the Guardian released a pulse of energy that washed over him and his men. I could see the memories fading from their eyes, replaced by confusion. "They'll wake up back in the city," the Guardian explained. "With no memory of this place or what transpired here, it is better this way." As Thompson and his men vanished, transported by the forest's magic to safety, we turned to face the Guardian. "Is it over?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The Guardian's form began to fade, its voice growing distant. "This battle is won, but the war is never ending. You are the forest's guardians now. Its fate, and the fate of the connection between humanity and nature, rests in your hands." As the Guardian disappeared, we were left standing in the clearing, forever changed. The forest thrummed with life around us, and I could feel every heartbeat, every breath of wind, every drop of sap, as if it were my own. Sarah turned to us, her eyes shining with a mix of tears and starlight. "What do we do now?" Jack placed a gnarled, bark-covered hand on her shoulder. "We protect, we teach, we remind humanity of what they've forgotten." I nodded, feeling the weight and the joy of our new purpose filling me. We become the bridge between worlds, the voice for those who cannot speak. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, we stood together. No longer just a ranger, a biologist, and a retired old-timer. We were guardians of the forest, emblems of nature's power and humanity's potential to live in harmony with the world around us. The battle had been won, but our journey, our true purpose, was just beginning. The world had changed overnight. As I stood at the edge of the forest, watching the sunrise paint the sky in hues of pink and gold, I couldn't help but marvel at how different everything looked. The trees seemed taller, the air fresher, and the sounds of the forest more vibrant than ever before. But it wasn't just the forest that had changed. I had too. The aftermath of our confrontation with the corporation and the revelation of the Guardian to the world had been chaotic, to say the least. News crews swarmed the area, scientists clamored for access, and government officials scrambled to make sense of it all. Through it all, I found myself at the center of a storm I never could have imagined when I first arrived at this ranger station. As I turned to head back to my cabin, I saw Sarah approaching, a newspaper tucked under her arm. "Morning, hero," she said with a smirk, holding out the paper. I groaned at the headline, "Forest Ranger turned Savior, the man who unveiled nature's greatest secret." "I wish they'd stop calling me that," I muttered, handing the paper back to her. Sarah's expression softened. "I know it's not easy, but you did save this place. Without you, who knows what would have happened to the Guardian and all the undiscovered species in there." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I just did what anyone would have done if they knew the truth." "But they didn't know the truth," Sarah insisted. "You were the one brave enough to seek it out and stand up for what's right." As we walked back to the station, I couldn't help but reflect on the events that had led us here. The confrontation with my superiors had been intense, with accusations flying and threats being made. But when the Guardian and its forest allies had made their presence known, everything had changed. I remembered the awe on people's faces as they watched trees bend and sway of their own accord, flowers blooming in seconds, and animals thought to be extinct emerging from the shadows. The Guardian itself, in all its ancient, majestic glory, had stood before the cameras, its telepathic message of protection and harmony broadcast to millions. The declaration of the forest as a protected sanctuary had come swiftly after that, but with it came new challenges. As we reached the station, I saw Jack waiting for us, his weathered face creased with concern. "We've got a situation," he said without preamble. "Some folks are trying to sneak into the restricted areas again." I sighed. "I'll handle it." As I grabbed my gear, Sarah touched my arm. "Are you sure you're up for this? You've been through a lot." I gave her a reassuring smile. "I'm fine. It's my job, after all." But as I headed into the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just a job now. It was a calling. The forest seemed to come alive around me as I walked, branches shifting to clear my path, birds calling out warnings of intruders ahead. I still wasn't used to this new connection I felt with the land, but I was grateful for it. I found the group of trespassers easily enough, a team of researchers who had ignored the new restrictions in their eagerness to study the Guardian's domain. Folks, I called out, making them jump. I'm going to have to ask you to turn back. This area is off limits. A woman who seemed to be the leader of the group stepped forward, her eyes blazing with determination. You don't understand. We're on the verge of discoveries that could change everything we know about biology, ecology, even physics. You can't keep this hidden from the world. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my new role settling on my shoulders. I understand your enthusiasm, believe me, but this isn't just about scientific discovery. It's about protecting a delicate ecosystem that's existed in isolation for millennia. We can't risk destroying it in our haste to understand it. But, she began, but I cut her off. I promise you, there will be opportunities for carefully regulated research, but it has to be done right, with the approval of both our team and the Guardian itself. At the mention of the Guardian, the group's eyes widened. One of them, a young man clutching a notebook, asked in a whisper, "You can communicate with it?" I nodded slowly. In a way, and right now, it's asking for peace and patience. Can you respect that? There was a moment of tense silence before the leader finally nodded. We'll go, but this isn't over. The world needs to know what's here. As I watched them leave, I couldn't help but agree. The world did need to know, but they needed to know the right way, the way that would preserve this magical place rather than destroy it. Returning to the station, I found Sarah and Jack waiting for me. How'd it go? Jack asked. They left peacefully, I replied, but they won't be the last. We need a better system for managing access and research. Sarah nodded. I've been working on a proposal. We'll need to collaborate with universities, create strict protocols. As she talked, I felt a familiar tingling sensation at the base of my skull. The Guardian was reaching out. Excuse me, I said, cutting Sarah off mid-sentence. I need to check something. I walked away, heading deeper into the forest until I reached a small clearing. There, shimmering into existence like a mirage, was the Guardian. You've done well. Its voice echoed in my mind. But your journey is far from over. I know, I replied out loud. I'm trying my best to protect this place, to honor what you've entrusted to me. The Guardian's massive form seemed to ripple, its eyes glowing with an ancient wisdom. You are more than just a protector now. You are becoming one with the forest as I am. Have you noticed the changes? I had. The way plants seemed to reach for me as I passed. The way I could sense animals hiding long before I saw them. The way the very air seemed to whisper secrets to me on the wind. What's happening to me? I asked, a mix of awe and fear in my voice. You are becoming what you were always meant to be, the Guardian replied. A bridge between worlds, a new Guardian for a new age. The implications of its words hit me like a thunderbolt. But I'm human, I protested. I'm not. The Guardian's rumbling laugh filled my mind. You are more than you know. The forest has chosen you, as it chose me eons ago. In time, you will understand. With that, the Guardian faded away, leaving me alone with my whirling thoughts. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. The changes the Guardian had spoken of continued, subtle at first, then more pronounced. My senses sharpened beyond human limits. I found I could communicate with plants and animals in ways I never thought possible. And sometimes when I wasn't paying attention, I could swear my skin shimmered with the same otherworldly glow as the Guardian's. Sarah and Jack stood by me through it all, helping me navigate my new reality and the challenges that came with it. We worked tirelessly to create a system that would allow for scientific study of the forest while preserving its sanctity. It wasn't easy. There were protests, legal battles, and more than a few close calls with those who sought to exploit the forest's secrets. But through it all, the forest thrived. New species were discovered, ancient mysteries unraveled, and a new understanding of the interconnectedness of nature began to spread throughout the world. And me? I found a piece I never knew I was missing. The forest became more than my home. It became a part of me, and I a part of it. On the 10th anniversary of the Guardian's revelation to the world, I stood once again at the edge of the forest, watching the sunrise. Sarah joined me, her hand slipping into mine. "Can you believe it's been 10 years?" she asked, her voice soft with wonder. I smiled, my eyes, now with a distinct, otherworldly glow, scanning the trees. In some ways it feels like yesterday, in others like lifetimes. Sarah squeezed my hand. "Any regrets?" I thought about the life I'd left behind, the normal future I might have had. Then I thought about the wonders I'd seen, the miracles I'd been part of, and the incredible journey still ahead. "Not a single one," I replied, as if in response the forest seemed to come alive around us, a symphony of rustling leaves and animal calls rising in a joyous chorus. And as I stood there, hand in hand with Sarah, I knew that this was just the beginning. The forest had many more secrets to share, and I, its new guardian, would be there to protect them for centuries to come. The crisp Oregon air filled my lungs as I stepped into the lush forest, my heart pounding with excitement. The canopy above filtered the sunlight, creating a dappled pattern on the forest floor. I adjusted my backpack, filled with sampling equipment and field notebooks, ready to begin our expedition. "Dr. Amelia Chen, over here," called out my colleague, Dr. Sarah Patel. She was crouched near the base of a massive Douglas fir, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. "I think I've found our first sampling site." I made my way over to her, carefully navigating the uneven terrain. As I approached, I noticed an unusual shimmer in the moss covering the tree's roots and spreading outward. It was unlike anything I'd seen in my years as a botanist. "Sarah, are you seeing this?" I asked, kneeling beside her. "The texture of this moss, it's almost iridescent." Sarah nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I've never seen anything like it. It's beautiful, but strange." Let's take some samples and run some preliminary tests. We spent the next hour carefully collecting specimens, taking photographs, and recording our initial observations. As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something fundamentally different about this moss. Its color seemed to shift subtly as we moved, and its texture was both soft and resilient in a way that defied explanation. "Emilia!" Sarah called out suddenly, her voice tinged with a mix of excitement and concern. "Come look at this quadrat I marked an hour ago." I made my way over to her sampling area, marked off with bright yellow tape. What I saw made me gasp. The moss within the quadrat had grown noticeably, spreading beyond the tape markers. That's not possible," I muttered, rubbing my eyes in disbelief. "Moss doesn't grow this quickly, not by a long shot." Sarah nodded grimly. "I know. I've been watching it for the past 10 minutes, and I swear I can see it growing. It's subtle, but it's there." We exchanged worried glances. This discovery could be groundbreaking, but it also filled me with an inexplicable sense of unease. "We need to document this thoroughly," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let's set up time-lapse cameras and mark off larger areas for observation. If this growth rate is consistent, we could be looking at a completely new species." As we set up our equipment, I couldn't help but notice that the moss seemed to be more prevalent than when we first arrived. It was spreading across the forest floor, climbing up tree trunks, and even appearing on rocks that I could have sworn were bare earlier. "Sarah," I called out, "are you seeing this? The moss. It seems to be everywhere now." She looked up from her notebook, her eyes widening as she took in our surroundings. "You're right. It's like it's expanding its territory, but that's not how moss typically behaves. This is more like it's alive," I finished for her, a chill running down my spine despite the warm afternoon sun. We worked in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts as we continued to document our findings. As the day wore on, we decided to set up camp nearby to continue our observations overnight. As we pitched our tents, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the moss creeping up behind me. Sarah noticed my unease. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You seem jumpy." I forced a laugh, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Just excited about our discovery, I guess. And maybe a little spooked by all this unfamiliar growth. It's silly, I know." Sarah smiled reassuringly. "It's not silly. This is unlike anything we've ever encountered. It's okay to be a little on edge, but remember, we're scientists. We'll figure this out." As night fell, we sat around our small campfire, discussing our findings and hypotheses. The forest seemed unusually quiet, with none of the typical nocturnal sounds we'd expect. "What do you think it could be?" I asked Sarah, poking at the fire with a stick. "Some kind of mutant strain? Or maybe a species that's been dormant for centuries?" Sarah shrugged, her face illuminated by the flickering flames. "It could be anything. Maybe it's not even from Earth. Wouldn't that be something? Alien moss in Oregon." We laughed, but there was an undercurrent of nervousness in our voices. The idea, as absurd as it seemed, wasn't entirely implausible given what we'd seen. As we prepared to turn in for the night, I took one last look around our campsite. The moss seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, creating an otherworldly atmosphere. "Good night, Emilia," Sarah called from her tent. "Try to get some sleep. We've got a big day of research ahead of us tomorrow." "Good night," I replied, zipping up my tent. "Wake me if you notice anything strange." I lay in my sleeping bag, staring at the tent ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. Just as I was finally drifting off to sleep, I heard it. A strange, muffled sound coming from the forest floor. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but as I held my breath and listened intently, I could hear it clearly. It was a soft, squelching noise, like something viscous slowly spreading across the ground. My heart began to race. I wanted to call out to Sarah to ask if she could hear it too, but fear kept me silent. I lay there, paralyzed, as the sound grew louder and seemed to surround our campsite. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. I wanted to unzip my tent and look outside, but I couldn't bring myself to move. As exhaustion finally overtook me, I drifted into an uneasy sleep, my dreams filled with images of shimmering, moving moss consuming everything in its path. Little did I know that when we woke up, our real nightmare would just be beginning. The moss in the forest had indeed begun to move towards us, and our lives would never be the same. I jolted awake, disoriented and groggy. The first rays of dawn were barely peeking through the fabric of my tent, but something felt off. The air was thick, humid, and carried an unfamiliar earthy scent. As I sat up in my sleeping bag, I noticed a strange pressure against the sides of my tent. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. "Are you awake?" I heard rustling from her tent, followed by a muffled gasp. "Emilia? You need to see this." Unzipping my tent, I poked my head out and froze. Our entire campsite was surrounded by a thick, undulating carpet of moss. It covered every inch of the ground, climbing up tree trunks and rocks, creating a sea of green that pulsed with an otherworldly life. "What the hell?" I whispered, crawling out of my tent. The moss seemed to ripple at the sound of my voice. Sarah emerged from her tent, her face pale with shock. "It's everywhere. This isn't normal moss behavior." As we stood there, taking in the impossible scene before us, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The edge of the moss carpet was slowly, but visibly, creeping towards us. "Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "we need to move. Now." She nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "Grab what you can. We need to get to higher ground." We frantically began packing our essential gear, field notebooks, cameras, and sampling equipment. As we worked, the moss continued its relentless advance. "Leave the tents," I shouted as Sarah hesitated near her tent. "We don't have time." We shouldered our backpacks and began to retreat, watching in horror as the moss swallowed our abandoned campsite. The tents collapsed under the weight of the advancing green tide. "Which way?" Sarah panted as we ran. I pointed to a rocky outcropping in the distance. "There. If we can get up those rocks, maybe we can get a better view and figure out what's happening." We sprinted through the forest, leaping over fallen logs and ducking under low-hanging branches. The moss seemed to be everywhere, covering the forest floor in a thick blanket that undulated and shifted as if alive. Suddenly, my foot caught on a hidden root, and I went down hard. I felt a sharp pain in my ankle as I hit the ground. Before I could push myself up, I felt something cool and damp wrapping around my leg. "Emilia!" Sarah screamed, turning back when she realized I had fallen. I looked down in horror to see tendrils of moss crawling up my leg with surprising strength. It wasn't just growing, it was actively grabbing me. "Sarah, help!" I cried, trying to shake off the clingy vegetation. But the more I struggled, the tighter it seemed to grip. Sarah rushed to my side, her face a mask of determination. She grabbed my arms and started pulling. "Hold on, Emilia. I've got you." I could feel the moss trying to pull me back, its grip alarmingly powerful for what should have been simple plant life. Sarah strained, her muscles trembling with effort. "It's not letting go," I gasped, panic rising in my chest. Sarah's eyes darted around, looking for something to help. She spotted a fallen branch nearby and grabbed it. "Hang on, I have an idea." She began using the branch to scrape at the moss holding my leg. To our surprise, the moss recoiled from the rough treatment, its tendrils withdrawing slightly. "It doesn't like that," Sarah muttered. "Keep still. I'm going to try to pry it off." She worked quickly, using the branch to create a barrier between my leg and the grasping moss. Slowly, painfully, I was able to pull free. "Thanks," I gasped as Sarah helped me to my feet. I tested my weight on my ankle, wincing at the pain. "I think I've sprained it." "We can't stop now," Sarah said, glancing nervously at the advancing moss. "Lean on me. We need to keep moving." Supporting each other, we continued our retreat, moving as fast as my injured ankle would allow. The moss seemed to be picking up speed, rolling across the forest floor like a green tidal wave. As we climbed the rocky outcropping, I couldn't help but look back. The sight nearly made me lose my footing again. The entire forest below us was a sea of undulating green, with occasional islands of treetops poking through. "This is impossible," I breathed, my scientific mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. "Moss doesn't behave like this. It doesn't move. It doesn't hunt." Sarah helped me sit on a flat rock, both of us panting from exertion and fear. "We need to rethink everything we know about this species," she said, her voice shaky but determined. "This isn't just a new type of moss. It's something else entirely." I nodded, wincing as I examined my swollen ankle. "We need to get word out. This could be incredibly dangerous if it spreads beyond this forest." Sarah pulled out her phone, then cursed. "No signal. We're too far out." I looked around, trying to get my bearings. "If we keep heading east, we should hit the ranger station eventually. They'll have a radio, at least." As we caught our breath and planned our next move, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The moss below us seemed to be swirling in patterns, almost as if it was thinking. "Sarah," I said slowly, "I don't think this is just some mindless growth. Look at those patterns. It's like it's searching for something." She followed my gaze, her expression a mix of fear and scientific curiosity. "You're right. It's behaving more like a collective organism than individual plants. But what could be driving it?" Before I could respond, we heard a distant rumble. At first I thought it was thunder, but as it grew louder, I realized it was the sound of trees falling. "It's expanding its territory," I whispered in horror. "We need to warn people. This thing could devour the entire forest at this rate." Sarah nodded grimly. "And who knows where it'll stop? We have to find a way to contain it, to understand it." As we prepared to continue our journey, a thought struck me. "Sarah, what if it's not from Earth? You joked about alien moss last night, but what if that's exactly what we're dealing with?" She was quiet for a moment, her face pale in the morning light. "If that's true, then we're not just dealing with an ecological disaster. We could be facing the first stages of an alien invasion." The weight of that possibility settled over us like a shroud. We were no longer just scientists on a field expedition. We had become witnesses to something that could change the course of human history. "We need to move," I said, forcing myself to my feet despite the pain in my ankle. "Every minute we waste puts more people at risk." Sarah nodded, helping me stand. "You're right. Whatever this thing is, we can't let it spread unchecked. We're the only ones who know what's happening." As we began our perilous journey towards the ranger station, I couldn't help but cast one last glance at the sea of moss below. It seemed to pulse with malevolent intent, and I swore I could hear a faint alien whisper carried on the wind. "Be careful what you wish for," I muttered to myself, thinking of how excited we had been to discover a new species just yesterday. Now that discovery might cost us everything. With Sarah's support, I limped forward, each step taking us further from the advancing moss but closer to an uncertain future. We were no longer just botanists. We had become humanity's first line of defense against a threat we barely understood. And as the sound of falling trees echoed behind us, I realized that our real adventure, and our real nightmare, was only just beginning. Sarah and I had been trudging through the dense Oregon forest for hours, my sprained ankle slowing our progress considerably. The moss seemed to have stopped its rapid advance, but we couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, waiting, perhaps even watching us. "We need to rest," Sarah said, helping me lower myself onto a fallen log. "Your ankle's getting worse." I winced as I stretched out my leg. "We can't stop for long. We have to reach the ranger station." As Sarah rummaged through her backpack for our first aid kit, a twig snapped somewhere in the undergrowth. We both froze, our eyes scanning the surrounding forest. "Hello?" I called out cautiously. "Is someone there?" For a moment there was only silence. Then a gruff voice responded. Ain't smart to be yellin' in these woods, missy. Attracts all sorts of unwanted attention. From behind a large oak tree, a figure emerged. He was an old man, probably in his 70s, with a wild gray beard and piercing blue eyes. He wore tattered clothes and carried a walking stick that looked more like a gnarled branch than a proper cane. Sarah tensed beside me. "Who are you?" she demanded. The old man chuckled, a dry, wheezing sound. "Folks around here call me Old Joe. I'm what you might call a local expert on these woods." I exchanged a glance with Sarah. "Could this strange hermit help us?" "Sir," I began, "we've encountered something unusual in the forest. A kind of moss that moves?" Old Joe interrupted, his eyes narrowing. "That grows faster than any plant ought to?" My jaw dropped. "You know about it?" He nodded grimly. "Oh, I know about it all right. Been watching it for years. It's why I call these parts the hungry forest." Sarah leaned forward, her scientific curiosity piqued despite our dire situation. "What can you tell us about it? Where did it come from?" Old Joe settled himself on a nearby stump, leaning on his walking stick. "It's been here longer than me, that's for sure. My pappy used to tell stories about it when I was just a boy. Said it came from the stars in a great ball of fire that lit up the night sky." I felt a chill run down my spine. Our alien theory suddenly seemed much more plausible. "Has it always been active like this?" I asked. Old Joe shook his head. "Nah, it used to stay put mostly, but every now and then it'd get hungry. That's when folks would start disappearing." Sarah's eyes widened. "Disappearing? You mean people have gone missing because of the moss?" "More than you'd think," Old Joe said solemnly. "Hikers, campers, even a few loggers over the years. They go into the deep woods and never come out. The official folks, they blame it on bears or getting lost, but I know better." I pulled out my phone, hoping against hope for a signal. "We need to call for help, warn people." Old Joe let out a bark of laughter. "No signal out here, missy. The moss doesn't like technology much. Tends to interfere with it somehow." Sarah and I exchanged worried glances. We were more cut off than we'd realized. "There's a ranger station east of here," I said. "We were heading there to use their radio." Old Joe's face darkened. "That station's been abandoned for years now. After the last ranger went missing, they just stopped sending folks out here." My heart sank. Our best hope for contacting the outside world had just evaporated. "Then what can we do?" Sarah asked, a note of desperation in her voice. "We can't just let this thing spread unchecked." Old Joe was quiet for a moment, his gnarled hands tightening on his walking stick. "There might be a way," he said finally. "I know these woods better than anyone. I can guide you to safety, show you paths the moss can't reach." Hope flared in my chest, but Sarah looked skeptical. "Why would you help us?" she asked. The old man's eyes glittered. "Well, now, I didn't say I'd do it for free. Information like that, it's valuable, and an old man's gotta eat, don't he?" I felt a flicker of unease. Something about Old Joe's demeanor had changed, become more calculating. But what choice did we have? "What do you want?" I asked cautiously. Old Joe grinned, revealing a mouth with more gaps than teeth. "Well, I reckon them fancy cameras and equipment you're carrying would fetch a nice price. And whatever cash you got on you wouldn't hurt neither." Sarah bristled. "That's our research equipment. We need it to document the moss to prove what's happening here." "Proof won't do you much good if you're moss food now, will it?" Old Joe countered. I placed a hand on Sarah's arm, silencing her protest. "We'll give you what we can," I said to Old Joe. "But we need to keep some of our equipment. The world needs to know about this threat." The old man considered for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. We got a deal then?" Before I could respond, a distant sound caught my attention. It was that same squelching noise we'd heard the night before, but louder now, more purposeful. Old Joe's head snapped up, his eyes wide with fear. "It's on the move again," he whispered. "We need to go. Now." He helped me to my feet, surprisingly strong for his age. "There's an old cabin not far from here," he said as we started moving. "We'll be safe there for the night. Tomorrow I'll show you the way out of this cursed forest." As we hurried through the darkening woods, following old Joe's lead, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Something about this situation felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what. "I don't trust him," Sarah whispered to me as we walked. "This could be a trap." I nodded slightly. "I know, but what choice do we have? We're lost, injured, and that thing is after us. We need his help." The sound of moving moss grew louder behind us, spurring us to move faster despite my injured ankle. Old Joe led us through twisting game trails and over small streams, always staying just ahead of the advancing green tide. As night fell, we finally reached the cabin. It was an old, dilapidated structure that looked like it had seen better days a century ago. "Home, sweet home," Old Joe cackled, pushing open the creaky door. "Get inside. Quick now." We stumbled into the musty interior, and Old Joe slammed the door behind us, throwing several heavy bolts. "That should keep it out," he said, lighting an old oil lamp. "For now, at least." In the flickering light, I saw Sarah examining the cabin's single room. Her face was a mask of confusion and growing horror. "Emilia," she said slowly, "look at this place. The supplies, the maps on the walls. This isn't some hermit's cabin." I followed her gaze, my blood running cold as I realized what she meant. The cabin was filled with survival gear, scientific equipment, and detailed maps of the forest with the mosses spread carefully marked. "You're right," I whispered. "This looks more like a research station." We turned to Old Joe, who was watching us with a gleam in his eye that was far too intelligent for a simple hermit. "Who are you really?" I demanded. "And what do you know about the moss?" Old Joe's friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "You're right, I'm not just some old coot living in the woods. I've been studying the moss for years, trying to understand its potential." "Its potential?" Sarah echoed, horrified. "It's a threat to all life in this forest, maybe beyond." Old Joe shook his head. "You're thinking too small. This organism could revolutionize everything. Medicine, agriculture, even space travel. And I'm going to be the one to unlock its secrets." As the realization of our situation sank in, I heard that terrible squelching sound again, much closer now. The moss had followed us. "You led it here," I accused Old Joe. "We're trapped." He smiled, a cold, mirthless expression. "Not trapped, merely contained for further study. Don't worry, you'll be contributing to a scientific breakthrough. Isn't that what you wanted?" As the moss began to seep under the door and through the cracks in the walls, Sarah and I backed away, searching desperately for an escape route. We had walked right into a trap, lured by the promise of safety and answers. Now, as the hungry forest closed in around us, we realized that our fight for survival was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. The musty air of the cabin felt thick with tension as Sarah and I backed away from Old Joe, our eyes darting between him and the encroaching moss seeping through the cracks in the walls. "You're insane," I spat at Old Joe, my heart pounding in my chest. "This moss isn't something to be studied. It's a threat that needs to be contained." Old Joe's eyes gleamed with a fanatical light. "You're not seeing the big picture, Dr. Chen. This organism could be the key to solving some of humanity's greatest challenges. Imagine a self-replicating, adaptable biomass that could terraform planets, clean up pollution, even cure diseases." Sarah shook her head in disbelief. "At what cost? It's consuming everything in its path. It's not a tool, it's a predator." "Every great scientific breakthrough comes with risks," Old Joe countered, his voice taking on a lecturing tone. "The moss just needs to be understood and controlled." As he spoke, I noticed a subtle shift in the moss's behavior. It seemed to be concentrating around Old Joe, almost as if it were listening to him. A horrifying thought struck me. "You've been communicating with it, haven't you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Old Joe's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed just a little too green. "Smart girl," Yes, the moss and I have developed a symbiotic relationship over the years. It's taught me so much, and in return I provide it with new experiences, new subjects to study. The implications of his words sent a chill down my spine. The missing hikers and campers, that was you? You fed them to the moss? I prefer to think of it as facilitating scientific exploration, old Joe said, his tone disturbingly casual. Their sacrifices have advanced our understanding immeasurably. Sarah's face contorted with disgust. You're a monster. Old Joe shrugged, unperturbed by her accusation. History will vindicate me. Now shall we begin? I'm quite interested to see how the moss interacts with trained botanists like yourselves. As he spoke, the moss began to move more aggressively, creeping across the floor towards us. Sarah and I pressed our backs against the far wall, searching desperately for an escape route. There has to be another way out, I muttered, my eyes scanning the cabin's interior. Sarah nodded, her gaze fixed on old Joe and the advancing moss. Keep him talking. I'll look for an exit. I stepped forward, trying to keep old Joe's attention on me. How long have you been working with the moss? I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. Old Joe's eyes glazed over slightly, lost in memory. Oh, it's been decades now. I was just a young researcher when I first encountered it. I was supposed to be studying rare lichen species, but what I found, it changed everything. As he spoke, I saw Sarah slowly inching along the wall, her hands feeling for any hidden doors or weak spots. And you've been out here ever since? I pressed, trying to keep him engaged. Didn't anyone come looking for you? Old Joe laughed bitterly. Oh, they came looking all right. Colleagues, search parties, even my own family. But the forest, it has a way of making people disappear. A chill ran down my spine at his casual admission of what must have been multiple murders. This man was far more dangerous than we'd initially thought. Suddenly, Sarah's voice cut through the tense atmosphere. Emilia, I found something. I turned to see her pushing against a section of the wall. With a groan of protesting wood, a hidden door swung open, revealing a dark passage beyond. Old Joe's face contorted with rage. No, you can't leave. The experiment isn't finished. As he lunged towards us, the moss surged forward, its movements more purposeful now. It was clear that old Joe's control over the organism wasn't as complete as he believed. Run! I shouted, pushing Sarah towards the hidden door. We stumbled into the dark passage, the sounds of old Joe's enraged shouts and the unsettling squelch of the moss close behind us. The tunnel was narrow and damp, forcing us to move in single file. Keep going, Sarah urged from ahead of me. I think I see light up ahead. As we ran, I could hear old Joe's voice echoing behind us, growing more desperate and unhinged. You don't understand. I can't let you leave. The moss, it needs new subjects to study. To consume, to become. His words sent a fresh wave of terror through me, spurring me to ignore the pain in my ankle and run faster. Suddenly the tunnel opened up into a large underground cavern. Bioluminescent fungi clung to the walls, casting an eerie blue glow over everything. In the center of the cavern was a pool of water, its surface as still as glass. What is this place? Sarah gasped, her eyes wide as she took in our surroundings. Before I could respond, we heard old Joe's voice again, closer now. It's where it all began, he called out, his voice echoing around the cavern. Where the moss first took root on Earth. We turned to see him emerging from the tunnel, his clothes and skin now covered in a thin layer of undulating moss. He looked more plant than human now, his eyes glowing with an unnatural green light. Don't you see? He pleaded, reaching out towards us with moss-covered hands. This is the next step in evolution. We can be part of something greater than ourselves. Sarah and I backed away, moving closer to the edge of the underground pool. You've lost your mind, I said, trying to keep my voice firm despite my fear. The moss hasn't made you greater, it's consumed you. Old Joe's face twisted into a snarl. If you won't join willingly, then the moss will take you by force. It's hungry, and you'll make excellent specimens. As he spoke, the moss covering his body began to extend towards us, forming tendrils that reached across the cavern floor. "The water!" Sarah suddenly exclaimed. "The moss isn't growing near the water. It must not like it." Without hesitation, we plunged into the pool. The water was shockingly cold, but it seemed to repel the advancing moss. Old Joe howled in frustration as he reached the water's edge, unable to follow us in. "You can't escape," he shouted, his voice now a bizarre mixture of human and something else, something alien. "The moss is everywhere. It will find you." As we swam to the far side of the pool, I noticed a small opening in the cavern wall just above the waterline. "There," I pointed. "That might be a way out." We pulled ourselves out of the water and squeezed through the opening, finding ourselves in another tunnel. This one sloped upwards, and we could feel a faint breeze coming from above. "We need to seal this entrance," Sarah said, looking around frantically. "We can't let the moss follow us." I spotted a loose boulder nearby. With our combined strength, we managed to roll it in front of the opening, blocking the way we'd come. As we caught our breath, the reality of our situation began to sink in. We were lost underground, soaking wet with a sentient, predatory moss and its deranged human ally somewhere behind us. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice small in the darkness. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "We keep moving. We find a way to the surface, and we warn everyone about what's happening here." As we started our ascent through the tunnel, I couldn't shake the feeling that our escape from Old Joe and the moss was only temporary. Something told me that this alien organism wasn't going to give up its new prey so easily. The journey ahead was uncertain and fraught with danger, but one thing was clear: the fate of not just the forest, but possibly the entire world, now rested on our shoulders. We had to find a way to stop the moss before it was too late. The darkness of the tunnel pressed in around us as Sarah and I made our way upward, our breathing echoing off the damp stone walls. The faint breeze we'd felt earlier grew stronger, giving us hope that we were heading towards an exit. "How's your ankle holding up?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with concern. I winced as I took another step. It's seen better days, but the adrenaline is helping. We can't afford to slow down now. As we climbed, the narrow passage gradually widened, the rough stone beneath our feet smoothing out. Suddenly, Sarah stopped short, causing me to bump into her. "Emilia," she whispered, "do you see that?" Ahead of us, a faint blue glow illuminated the tunnel. As we cautiously approached, the passage opened up into a vast underground cavern that took our breath away. The ceiling soared high above us, lost in shadows, while the walls glittered with bioluminescent fungi in shades of blue and green. But it was the floor of the cavern that truly captured our attention, a sea of softly glowing, undulating shapes spread out before us. "It's beautiful," I breathed, momentarily forgetting our perilous situation. Sarah nodded, her scientist's curiosity overtaking her fear. "These fungi, they're unlike anything I've ever seen. The diversity, the bioluminescence, it's extraordinary." As we stepped further into the cavern, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. "Sarah, doesn't this seem a bit familiar?" She looked at me, realization dawning on her face. "The moss, the way these fungi are growing, it's similar to the patterns we saw in the forest." I nodded grimly. "I think we've found the source. This could be where it all started." We moved carefully through the cavern, our eyes darting between the mesmerizing fungi and the shadows that seemed to shift at the edge of our vision. "Look at this," Sarah called, crouching near a cluster of mushrooms. "These spores, they're unlike anything I've ever seen. It's almost as if they're moving on their own." I leaned in for a closer look, my scientific curiosity momentarily overriding my caution. The spores did indeed seem to be moving, swirling in patterns too complex to be random. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the cavern. We spun around to see a section of the glowing floor collapsing, revealing a yawning pit beneath. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Sarah's arm. We sprinted across the cavern floor, which was now rippling and breaking apart beneath our feet. It was as if the entire ecosystem had suddenly come alive, reacting to our presence. There! Sarah pointed to a rocky outcropping that rose above the undulating floor. We made a desperate leap, just barely managing to scramble onto the relative safety of the rocks. From our elevated position, we watched in horrified fascination as the cavern floor continued to move. The fungi were merging, forming larger structures that pulsed with an alien rhythm. "It's all connected," I gasped, the full implications hitting me. "The moss, the fungi, it's all part of one massive organism." Sarah nodded, her face pale in the eerie light. "And I think we just woke it up." As if in response to her words, tendrils of glowing fungi began to reach towards our rocky refuge. They moved with unsettling purpose, probing and searching. "We need to find a way out of here," I said, scanning the cavern walls for any sign of an exit. Sarah pointed to a dark opening high up on the far wall. "There, it looks like another tunnel." I grimaced, looking at the writhing mass of fungi between us and our potential escape route. "Getting there won't be easy." "We don't have a choice," Sarah replied, her voice grim. "We can't stay here." Taking a deep breath, we began to make our way across the cavern, leaping from one rocky outcropping to another. The fungal mass below us seemed to sense our movement, surging upward in attempts to catch us. Halfway across, disaster struck. As I landed on a small boulder, my injured ankle gave way. I stumbled, nearly falling into the writhing mass below. "Emilia!" Sarah cried, reaching out to steady me. But it was too late. A glowing tendril wrapped around my leg, its touch burning cold. I cried out in pain and shock as I felt it begin to pull me down. Sarah grabbed my arms, her face a mask of determination. "Hold on, I've got you." She strained against the fungal tendril, which was now joined by others, all trying to drag me into the living floor. I could feel a strange sensation creeping up my leg, as if the fungi were trying to merge with me. "Sarah," I gasped, "if you can't pull me free, you need to let go. Get out of here, warn people about what's happening." She shook her head fiercely. "Not a chance. We're getting out of here together." With a final, desperate heave, Sarah managed to pull me free. We collapsed onto the rock, both of us panting heavily. Looking down at my leg, I saw glowing patches where the fungi had touched me. They weren't spreading, but they weren't fading either. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. I nodded, still catching my breath. "I think so, but we need to move. Now." We resumed our perilous journey across the cavern, moving faster now despite our exhaustion. The fungal mass below seemed more agitated, its movements more frenzied. Finally, we reached the far wall and began to climb towards the tunnel opening. The rock face was slick with moisture, making our ascent treacherous. Below us, the fungal tendrils stretched upward, barely missing our feet as we climbed. With a final effort, we pulled ourselves into the tunnel. It sloped steeply upward, and we could feel a strong breeze flowing through it. "This has to lead to the surface," I said, hope rising in my chest. As we started up the tunnel, a deep rumbling sound echoed from the cavern behind us. We turned to see the entire cavern floor rising, forming a massive, pulsing mound that was rapidly filling the space. "It's following us!" Sarah shouted. We ran up the tunnel, ignoring our burning muscles and aching lungs. The rumbling grew louder, and I could feel the ground shaking beneath our feet. Just when I thought we couldn't go on any further, I saw a pinprick of daylight ahead. With renewed energy, we sprinted towards it. We burst out of the tunnel into blinding sunlight, finding ourselves on a forested hillside. Behind us, the tunnel entrance bulged as the fungal mass tried to force its way through. "We need to seal it somehow," I gasped, looking around frantically. Sarah spotted a precariously balanced boulder nearby. "There. If we can dislodge that, it might block the entrance." Working together, we managed to push the massive rock. It teetered for a heart-stopping moment, then crashed down in front of the tunnel entrance just as the first glowing tendrils emerged. We collapsed to the ground, exhausted but alive. As our breathing slowed, the full weight of what we discovered settled over us. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice small against the vastness of our discovery. I looked out over the forest, which now seemed alien and threatening. We find a way to contact the outside world. This isn't just about a strange moss anymore. We're dealing with something far bigger, far more dangerous than we ever imagined. Sarah nodded, her face set with determination. And we're the only ones who know about it. As we gathered ourselves to continue our journey, I couldn't shake the feeling that our ordeal was far from over. The glowing patches on my leg tingled, a constant reminder of the alien presence we'd encountered. Whatever this organism was, moss, fungi, or something beyond our understanding, it was clear that it posed a threat not just to this forest, but potentially to the entire world. And somehow Sarah and I had to find a way to stop it. With one last look at the sealed tunnel entrance, we set off into the forest, carrying the weight of our incredible and terrifying discovery with us. The fate of humanity might well rest on what we did next. Sarah and I stumbled through the forest, our clothes torn and dirty, our bodies aching from our underground ordeal. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. We'd been walking for hours, hoping to find some sign of civilization. "Wait," Sarah said suddenly, grabbing my arm. "Do you hear that?" I strained my ears and caught a faint mechanical hum. "It sounds like vehicles?" We quickened our pace, following the sound. As we crested a small hill, we saw it, a large clearing filled with prefab buildings, surrounded by a high fence topped with barbed wire. Military-style vehicles were parked in neat rows, and personnel in hazmat suits moved purposefully between the structures. "What is this place?" I whispered, crouching behind a bush. Before Sarah could respond, a loud voice boomed from hidden speakers. "Attention, unauthorized individuals. You have entered a restricted area. Remain where you are and await escort." Bright floodlights suddenly illuminated our position. We raised our hands, squinting against the glare as armed guards approached. "Please," I called out, "we're scientists. We've discovered something dangerous in the forest. We need help." The guards surrounded us, their faces hidden behind reflective visors. Without a word, they led us into the compound. As we passed through the gate, I noticed a sign. UC Biomed Research Facility. Authorized personnel only. We were brought to a stark, white room that looked like a cross between an interrogation chamber and a medical exam room. A stern-faced woman in a lab coat entered, flanked by two guards. "I'm Dr. Elaine Brenner, lead researcher at this facility," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "You've stumbled into a highly classified operation. I need to know who you are and what you've seen." Sarah and I exchanged glances before I spoke. "I'm Dr. Amelia Chen, and this is Dr. Sarah Patel. We're botanists studying rare moss species in the forest, but we found something we can't explain." Dr. Brenner's expression remained impassive, but I noticed a flicker of interest in her eyes. "Go on." We took turns explaining our encounter with the sentient moss, the underground cavern, and Old Joe. As we spoke, Dr. Brenner's face grew increasingly grave. When we finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she sighed heavily. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. Under normal circumstances, you'd be detained indefinitely for even being here. But given what you've encountered, you deserve to know the truth." She pressed a button on the wall, and a holographic display flickered to life, showing images of the moss and fungi we'd encountered. "The organism you discovered isn't from Earth," Dr. Brenner said, her voice matter-of-fact. "It's an alien life form that crash-landed here nearly 50 years ago." Despite everything we'd seen, the confirmation of extraterrestrial life left us stunned. "The government has been studying it in secret ever since," Dr. Brenner continued. "We've made incredible breakthroughs in biology, medicine, even materials science. But we've also been fighting to contain it." Sarah found her voice first. "Contain it? You mean it's been trying to spread all this time?" Dr. Brenner nodded grimly. "The organism is driven by an insatiable need to grow, to consume, to assimilate. It's not malevolent in the way we understand it. It simply does what it evolved to do. Unfortunately, that means consuming any biomass it encounters. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the sensation of the fungal tendrils on my leg. I rolled up my pant leg, revealing the still glowing patches. It touched me. Am I infected? Dr. Brenner's eyes widened. She rushed over with a handheld scanner, running it over the glowing areas. Fascinating, she muttered. It appears to be inert, but it's definitely bonded with your cellular structure. We'll need to run more tests. More tests? I echoed, fear creeping into my voice. What does that mean? What's going to happen to us? Dr. Brenner's expression softened slightly. I understand your concern, Dr. Chen, but you need to understand, you've both been exposed to something beyond our full comprehension. We can't simply let you walk away. Sarah stepped forward, her eyes flashing with anger. So we're prisoners now? After everything we've been through, everything we've discovered? Not prisoners, Dr. Brenner corrected. Think of yourselves as essential personnel. Your expertise could be invaluable in our research. I shook my head, trying to process everything. Research? You should be focusing on how to destroy this thing before it spreads further. Dr. Brenner's face hardened. Destroy it? Do you have any idea of the potential benefits this organism could bring to humanity? We're on the verge of curing diseases that have plagued us for centuries, of revolutionizing agriculture, of terraforming inhospitable environments. At what cost? Sarah shot back. You're playing with fire, Dr. Brenner. We've seen what this thing can do. It's not a tool to be used. It's a threat to all life on Earth. Before Dr. Brenner could respond, an alarm began blaring throughout the facility. Red lights flashed as a voice came over the intercom. Containment breach in Sector 7. All personnel evacuate immediately. Dr. Brenner's face paled. That's impossible, she whispered. Sector 7 is where we keep the primary sample. She rushed to a computer terminal, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Security camera footage appeared on the screen, showing a lab filled with a writhing mass of glowing moss and fungi. As we watched in horror, the mass grew, consuming everything in its path and spreading through air vents and doorways. It's breaking free, I said, my voice barely audible over the alarms. Just like in the forest. Dr. Brenner turned to us, her professional demeanor cracking. We need your help. You've encountered this thing in its natural state, survived it. That knowledge could be crucial in containing this outbreak. Sarah and I exchanged glances. Despite our mistrust of Dr. Brenner and this secret facility, we knew we couldn't stand by while this threat spread. What do you need us to do? I asked. Dr. Brenner led us quickly through the facility, explaining as we went. We've been experimenting with various methods of containment and control. Our most promising lead is a synthesized pheromone that seems to repel the organism, but we haven't had a chance to field test it. We entered a large lab filled with state-of-the-art equipment. Scientists in hazmat suits worked frantically, preparing canisters of a glowing blue liquid. This is our pheromone compound, Dr. Brenner said, handing us each a canister and a spray gun. We need to create a perimeter around the contaminated area. If it works, it should slow the organism's spread long enough for us to implement more permanent containment measures. As we prepared to head out, I couldn't help but voice the question that had been nagging at me. Dr. Brenner, how did this breach happen? The containment protocols you described seemed thorough. She hesitated before answering. We've had some success in communicating with the organism. One of our researchers believed he had developed a stronger connection. He thought he could control it. The image of old Joe, covered in moss and ranting about symbiosis, flashed through my mind. Let me guess. He thought he had a symbiotic relationship with it? Dr. Brenner nodded grimly. It appears the organism was simply biding its time, gathering information, and now it's making its move, Sarah finished. As we prepared to face the alien threat once again, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were woefully unprepared. This wasn't just about saving ourselves, or even this facility anymore. The fate of the entire world might well rest on what happened in the next few hours. With one last look at each other, Sarah and I followed Dr. Brenner towards the containment breach. Whatever happened next, we knew our lives would never be the same. The truth had been revealed, and with it came a responsibility we never could have imagined when we first set out to study a strange moss in the Oregon forest. The alarms blared incessantly as Dr. Brenner led Sarah and me through the labyrinthine corridors of the secret facility. The fluorescent lights flickered ominously, casting eerie shadows that seemed to writhe and pulse, mimicking the alien organism we were now tasked with containing. "The breach is spreading faster than we anticipated, Doctor," Brenner shouted over the cacophony of alarms and panicked voices. "We need to set up a perimeter with the pheromone compound immediately." As we rounded a corner, we came face to face with a group of scientists fleeing in the opposite direction. Their faces were etched with terror, and one of them grabbed Dr. Brenner's arm as they passed. "It's no use, Elaine," he cried. "The compound isn't working. It's like the organism has adapted already." Dr. Brenner's face paled, but she maintained her composure. "Keep evacuating. We'll figure something out." As the scientists disappeared down the hallway, Sarah turned to Dr. Brenner, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "You knew this might happen, didn't you? That's why you were so quick to enlist our help." Dr. Brenner hesitated before responding, her professional facade cracking slightly. "We had theorized that rapid adaptation might be possible, but we had no choice but to try." I felt a surge of anger rising within me. "No choice? You've been studying this thing for decades. How could you be so unprepared?" "You don't understand the pressure we've been under," Dr. Brenner snapped back. "The potential benefits of this organism are immeasurable. The government, the military, they all want results. We've had to take risks." Before our argument could escalate further, a bone-chilling screech echoed through the facility. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, a sound that seemed to exist somewhere between organic and mechanical. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, her anger momentarily replaced by fear. Dr. Brenner's face was grim. "It's evolving, adapting to its new environment. We need to get to the central lab. It's our last hope for containing this outbreak." As we made our way deeper into the facility, the signs of the organism's spread became more pronounced. Glowing tendrils of moss crept along the walls, and patches of bioluminescent fungi pulsed in the shadows. The air grew thick and humid, filled with spores that danced in the flickering light. We finally reached the central lab, a vast chamber filled with advanced equipment and glowing containment tubes. A team of scientists in hazmat suits worked feverishly at various stations. Dr. Brenner quickly briefed the lead scientist, Dr. Takahashi, on the situation. His eyes widened as he processed the information. "If the pheromone compound isn't working, we'll have to resort to more aggressive measures," Dr. Takahashi said, his voice heavy with resignation. He led us to a secure terminal and pulled up a schematic of the facility. "We've developed a fail-safe protocol in case of total containment failure. It involves releasing a powerful defoliant throughout the ventilation system. It should kill the organism, along with any other organic matter it comes into contact with." The implications of his words hung heavy in the air. Sarah was the first to speak up. "You're talking about a scorched earth policy. It would kill everyone still trapped in the contaminated areas." Dr. Takahashi nodded grimly. "It's not a decision we make lightly, but if this organism escapes the facility, the consequences for the entire planet would be catastrophic." I felt sick to my stomach. Just days ago, my biggest concern had been identifying a new species of moss. Now, I was party to a decision that could cost innocent lives. Dr. Brenner turned to Sarah and me, her eyes pleading. "You've encountered this organism in its natural state. You've seen what it's capable of. We need your input. What do you think we should do?" I exchanged a glance with Sarah, seeing my own conflict mirrored in her eyes. The weight of the decision pressed down on us like a physical force. "There has to be another way," I said, my mind racing. "The organism communicates through chemical signals, right? What if we could use that to our advantage?" Dr. Takahashi looked intrigued. "What are you suggesting?" "Instead of trying to kill it, what if we could communicate with it? Convince it to retreat or become dormant?" I proposed. Sarah caught on to my train of thought. Yes, if we could synthesize the right chemical compounds, we might be able to speak to it in its own language. Dr. Brenner shook her head. It's too risky. We've tried communication before, and it only led to this outbreak. We can't take that chance again. As the debate raged on, I found my thoughts drifting to the glowing patches on my leg, the places where the organism had touched me in the underground cavern. Throughout our ordeal, they had remained inert, neither spreading nor fading. An idea began to form in my mind, equal parts thrilling and terrifying. What if, I began, my voice barely above a whisper, what if I could communicate with it directly? All eyes in the room turned to me. Sarah grabbed my arm, her face a mask of concern. Emilia, what are you talking about? I rolled up my pant leg, revealing the glowing patches. The organism touched me, but it didn't consume me. What if that means I'm compatible somehow? What if I could interface with it? Dr. Brenner's eyes widened with a mixture of scientific curiosity and apprehension. It's possible. The organism does seem to form symbiotic relationships with certain hosts. But the risks... I know the risks, I interrupted. But if it means saving lives and preventing a potential global catastrophe, isn't it worth trying? The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications of my proposal. It was Sarah who finally broke the silence. If you're doing this, you're not doing it alone, she said firmly. We're in this together. Dr. Takahashi cleared his throat. If we're going to attempt this, we need to move quickly. The organism's spread is accelerating. We can set up a controlled environment in one of the secure labs, but once you're in there, we may not be able to extract you if things go wrong. As the scientists began preparing the lab, Dr. Brenner pulled me aside. Dr. Chen, I need to be absolutely clear about what you're volunteering for. There's a very real possibility that you won't come out of this the same person you are now. The organism may alter you in ways we can't predict. I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. I understand. But I also understand what will happen if we don't try this. I've seen what this organism can do. If there's even a chance I can prevent it from spreading further, I have to take it. As Sarah and I were led to the secure lab, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a darkened monitor. I barely recognized the person staring back at me, dirty, disheveled, with a determined glint in her eye that bordered on fanatical. I wondered, not for the first time, how I had gone from studying moss to potentially sacrificing myself to an alien entity in the span of a few days. The secure lab was a stark white room with a large containment chamber in the center. Inside the chamber, a sample of the organism pulsed and writhed, its bioluminescent glow casting strange shadows on the walls. As the technicians helped me into a protective suit, Sarah gripped my hand tightly. Are you sure about this, Emilia? There's no shame in backing out. I squeezed her hand in return. I'm sure. Whatever happens, know that it's been an honor working with you, Dr. Patel. With a final nod to the observation team, I stepped into the airlock. As the door sealed behind me with a hiss, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. The inner door of the containment chamber opened and I stepped inside. The organism seemed to sense my presence immediately, its movements becoming more agitated. As I approached, tendrils of glowing moss reached out towards me. Okay, I whispered to myself. Let's talk. I removed the glove from my right hand, exposing the glowing patches on my skin. As I reached out to touch the writhing mass before me, I silently prayed that I was making the right choice. The fate of humanity might well rest on my ability to communicate with this alien intelligence. The moment my hand made contact, a jolt of energy surged through my body. My vision blurred, and I felt my consciousness expanding, merging with something vast and utterly alien. In that moment, I realized that our understanding of the organism had been hopelessly limited. This wasn't just a threat to be contained or a resource to be exploited. It was a doorway to something beyond human comprehension. As my mind melded with the alien intelligence, I knew that whatever the outcome, nothing would ever be the same again. The moral dilemma we had faced was just the beginning. The true test of humanity's ethics and adaptability was yet to come. The moment my consciousness merged with the alien organism, I was overwhelmed by a flood of sensations and information. Colors I had never seen before danced across my vision, and I could feel the pulse of life in every cell around me. But amidst this kaleidoscope of alien perceptions, one thing became crystal clear. The organism wasn't hostile. It was scared, confused, and desperately trying to survive in an environment it didn't understand. I don't know how long I stood there, my hand pressed against the writhing mass of bioluminescent matter. It could have been minutes or hours. When I finally managed to pull away, I stumbled backwards, gasping for air. "Emilia," Sarah's voice crackled through the intercom. "Are you all right? What happened?" I looked up at the observation window, seeing the concerned faces of Sarah, Dr. Brenner, and the other scientists. I communicated with it," I said, my voice hoarse. "It's not trying to consume everything. It's trying to adapt, to understand. We've been misinterpreting its actions this whole time." Dr. Brenner leaned into the microphone, her face a mixture of excitement and skepticism. "What do you mean, Dr. Chen? Can you be more specific?" I shook my head, trying to organize my thoughts. "It's hard to explain. The organism, it's so much more complex than we realized. It's not just reacting to stimuli. It's thinking, learning, evolving at an incredible rate." As I spoke, I noticed something strange. The glowing patches on my skin were spreading, but I felt no pain or discomfort. Instead, I felt enhanced. My senses seemed sharper, my mind clearer. "We need to change our approach," I continued. "Containment isn't the answer. We need to find a way to coexist, to learn from each other." Dr. Brenner's expression hardened. "Dr. Chen, I understand you've been through a unique experience, but we can't simply abandon our protocols based on your impressions. The risk is too great." I felt a surge of frustration. "You're not listening. This could be the greatest scientific discovery in human history, and you want to destroy it because you're afraid." As I spoke, I felt a strange resonance with the organism behind me. The bioluminescent mass pulsed in sync with my words, as if emphasizing my point. Dr. Brenner's eyes widened in alarm. "Dr. Chen, step away from the organism now. You've been compromised." "Emilia?" Sarah's voice was gentle but urgent. "Please, come out of there. We need to run some tests, make sure you're okay." But I knew I couldn't leave. Not now, when I was on the verge of a breakthrough. I turned back to the organism, placing my hand against it once more. This time the connection was instantaneous. In a flash of insight, I understood what needed to be done. The organism wasn't just adapting to our world, it was offering us a chance to adapt with it, to evolve beyond our current limitations. "I'm sorry," I said, not sure if I was speaking to Sarah, Dr. Brenner, or myself. "But I can't let you destroy this. It's too important." With a thought, I directed the organism to interface with the lab's systems. Alarms blared as containment protocols were overridden. The door to the chamber hissed open. "Emilia, no!" Sarah shouted. But it was too late. I stepped out of the chamber, the organism flowing around me like a second skin. Scientists scrambled backwards, their faces masks of terror. "Please," I said, raising my hands in a placating gesture. "I don't want to hurt anyone, I just need you to listen." But Dr. Brenner had already made her decision. "Security to the main lab," she shouted into her comm device. "Containment breach. Initiate lockdown procedures." I knew I had only moments before the full force of the facility's security would descend upon us. I reached out with my newfound senses, searching for a way out. "This way," I said to the organism, not with words but with intent. We moved as one, flowing through the lab towards the ventilation system. "Emilia, stop!" Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. She stood before me, her eyes pleading. Don't do this. We can figure this out together. I hesitated, my heart aching at the fear and confusion in my friend's eyes. Come with me, Sarah. Let me show you what I've seen, what I've felt. This could change everything. For a moment, I thought she might agree, but then her expression hardened. I can't. This isn't you, Amelia. Whatever that thing has done to you, we can fix it. But you need to stop now. I shook my head sadly. I'm sorry, Sarah, but I've never seen things more clearly. With a gesture, I created a barrier of the organism between us. Sarah pounded against it, her shouts muffled by the pulsing biomass. As security forces burst into the lab, I slipped into the ventilation shaft, the organism propelling me forward at incredible speed. I could hear the shouts and pounding footsteps of my pursuers, but they seemed distant, almost irrelevant. I emerged from the ventilation system into a parking garage. Rows of military and civilian vehicles stood silent in the dim light. I quickly scanned the area, looking for the best means of escape. My eyes fell on a sleek, black SUV. With my enhanced abilities, bypassing the security system was trivial. The engine roared to life as I slid into the driver's seat. As I peeled out of the garage, I caught sight of Dr. Brenner and a team of security personnel bursting through a door. Our eyes met for a brief moment before I accelerated away, tires screeching on the asphalt. The SUV's GPS showed we were in a remote area of the Cascade Mountains. I headed east, hoping to lose my pursuers in the dense forest. As I drove, I tried to process everything that had happened. The organism, no, my new partner, pulsed gently against my skin, a constant reminder of the incredible journey I had embarked upon. We need to find somewhere safe, I said aloud, more for my own benefit than the organism's. Somewhere we can continue to learn from each other without interference. The forest blurred past as I pushed the SUV to its limits. In the rearview mirror, I could see a convoy of vehicles in pursuit, their headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. Suddenly, a familiar voice crackled through the SUV's radio. Amelia? Amelia, can you hear me? My heart clenched. It was Sarah. Please, Amelia, she continued, her voice thick with emotion. Pull over. Let us help you. Whatever you think this organism is offering you, it's not worth throwing your life away. I wanted to respond, to explain to her what I had experienced, but I knew there was no way to make her understand with words alone. She would have to see for herself. As if sensing my thoughts, the organism began to pulse more rapidly. I felt a surge of energy, and suddenly, my perception expanded. I could sense the layout of the road ahead, the positions of my pursuers, even the wildlife scurrying through the underbrush. With this newfound awareness, evading capture became almost effortless. I took sharp turns off the main road, navigating through barely visible logging trails with uncanny precision, but my pursuers were persistent. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't shake them entirely. As we raced through the darkening forest, I realized we needed a new plan. We can't keep running forever, I said to my symbiotic partner. We need to find a way to communicate with them, to show them what we've discovered. The organism pulsed in agreement. As we crested a hill, I saw a clearing ahead. In the center stood a massive, gnarled, old-growth tree. Something about it called to me, and I instinctively knew this was where we needed to make our stand. I brought the SUV to a skidding halt at the edge of the clearing. As I stepped out, the organism flowed around me, creating a protective cocoon that glowed softly in the twilight. The convoy of pursuit vehicles arrived moments later, surrounding the clearing. Doors slammed as armed personnel took up positions, their weapons trained on me. Dr. Brenner emerged from one of the vehicles, megaphone in hand. Dr. Chen, this is your last chance. Surrender now, and we can help you. I took a deep breath, then projected my voice with the organism's help. I'm not your enemy, Dr. Brenner. None of us are. We've been given an incredible opportunity, but you're too blinded by fear to see it. As I spoke, I began walking towards the ancient tree. The organism flowed from my body to the ground, spreading out in a circle around me. Stay back, one of the soldiers shouted. Don't come any closer. But I kept walking, my eyes fixed on Dr. Brenner. You wanted to study this organism, to unlock its secrets. Well, I've done that. I've seen what it can offer us. Please, just give me a chance to show you. I could see the conflict in Dr. Brenner's eyes. Scientific curiosity warred with ingrained caution. Finally, she lowered the megaphone. "Hold your fire," she ordered the soldiers. As I reached the base of the tree, I placed my hand against its rough bark. The organism flowed from me into the tree, and suddenly, the entire clearing was awash in bioluminescent light. Gasps of awe and fear rose from the assembled group as the tree began to pulse with alien life. Tendrils of glowing moss reached out, not aggressively, but invitingly. "It's beautiful," I heard Sarah whisper. She had emerged from one of the vehicles and was staring at the spectacle with wide eyes. "This is just the beginning," I said, my voice carrying easily in the hushed clearing. "The organism isn't a threat to be contained or a resource to be exploited. It's a partner, offering us a chance to evolve, to reach our full potential as a species." Dr. Brenner took a hesitant step forward. "And the people it consumed? The destruction it caused?" I shook my head sadly. Misunderstandings on both sides. It was scared, trying to survive in an alien environment. But now that we can communicate, we can prevent those tragedies from happening again. As if to emphasize my point, the organism created a series of beautiful, complex patterns in the air. It was a display of art, of communication, of possibilities beyond our current comprehension. Slowly, cautiously, people began to lower their weapons. Sarah approached, her eyes never leaving the pulsing tree. "Amelia," she said softly, Is it safe?" I smiled and held out my hand. "See for yourself." With only a moment's hesitation, Sarah placed her hand in mine. The organism flowed between us, and I felt the instant her perception expanded. Her eyes widened in wonder. "Oh my God," she breathed. It's incredible." One by one, others stepped forward, scientists overcome by curiosity, soldiers laying down their weapons in awe. Even Dr. Brenner eventually approached, her scientific interest overcoming her fear. As the organism connected with more people, the clearing became a symphony of light and sensation. I could feel the barriers of individual consciousness beginning to blur, replaced by a growing sense of unity and shared purpose. In that moment, I knew that everything had changed. The world would never be the same after this night. We stood on the precipice of a new era of human evolution, with all its possibilities and perils. As the glow of the organism spread through the forest, I looked up at the star-filled sky. Somewhere out there was the organism's point of origin, and perhaps other life forms waiting to be discovered. Our journey, I realized, was just beginning. The pursuit had ended, but a new adventure, one that would reshape the very fabric of human existence, was only just beginning. The ethereal glow of the bioluminescent organism bathed the clearing in an otherworldly light. The initial awe and wonder of the assembled group had given way to a tense silence as the full implications of what was happening began to sink in. Dr. Brenner was the first to break the silence, her scientific curiosity warring with her ingrained caution. "Dr. Chen, Amelia, what exactly are you proposing here? This organism, it's clearly more than we ever imagined. But the risks..." I cut her off, my voice resonating with a new timbre that seemed to vibrate through the very air. "The risks of not embracing this opportunity far outweigh any perceived dangers, Dr. Brenner. This isn't just about scientific discovery anymore. It's about the future of our species." Sarah, still connected to the organism through our joined hands, spoke up. "She's right, Dr. Brenner. What I'm experiencing, it's beyond anything we could have imagined. The potential for advancement, for understanding. It's staggering." But not everyone was convinced. One of the soldiers, a gruff-looking man with sergeant stripes, stepped forward. "With all due respect, ma'am, this thing has already caused deaths. How do we know it's not just manipulating you, trying to spread itself further?" I could feel the organism's response to the accusation, not anger, but a deep sadness and a desire to be understood. I tried to convey this as I addressed the sergeant. It's not manipulation, I explained. The organism doesn't think in those terms. What happened before was a tragic misunderstanding. It was trying to communicate, to connect, but we interpreted its actions as aggression. Dr. Brenner frowned, her analytical mind working overtime. But the rapid growth, the consumption of organic matter, how do you explain that? I took a deep breath, trying to find the words to express the alien concepts I now understood. It's not consumption in the way we think of it. It's integration, elevation. The organism doesn't destroy, it transforms. It takes what exists and makes it more. As I spoke, the bioluminescent glow pulsed and shifted, creating mesmerizing patterns that seemed to illustrate my words. Several of the scientists gasped in awe, their faces lit with childlike wonder. But the sergeant remained unconvinced. Pretty lights don't change the fact that this is an alien invasion. We need to contain it, study it in a controlled environment. No. The force of my shout took everyone by surprise, including myself. The organism reacted to my emotion, the glow intensifying and spreading further into the surrounding forest. You don't understand. We're beyond containment now. This is happening with or without your approval. Dr. Brenner's eyes widened as she looked around, realizing the truth of my words. The organism had already spread far beyond the clearing, tendrils of glowing moss creeping up trees and across the forest floor. My God, she whispered. How far has it spread? I closed my eyes, sensing through my connection with the organism. Miles, I said softly. And it's not stopping. Panic began to set in among some of the soldiers and scientists. The sergeant raised his weapon, his face a mask of fear and determination. We need to put a stop to this now before it's too late. Stand down, Sergeant, Dr. Brenner ordered, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. The tension in the clearing was palpable. I could feel the organism responding to the heightened emotions, its glow pulsing more rapidly. We were at a tipping point, and I knew I had to act fast to prevent disaster. Please, I said, my voice carrying a hint of the organism's resonance. I know you're scared, but what's happening here is beautiful, not terrifying. Let me show you. I stepped towards the sergeant, my hand outstretched. The bioluminescent material flowed around me, not as a barrier, but as an invitation. Don't come any closer, the sergeant warned, his finger tightening on the trigger. Time seemed to slow down. I could sense every heartbeat in the clearing, feel the fear and anticipation radiating from everyone present. In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. I'm sorry, I said softly, but this is too important. With a thought, I directed the organism to expand rapidly. In the blink of an eye, tendrils of glowing moss shot out in all directions, enveloping everyone in the clearing before they could react. Shouts of surprise and fear filled the air, quickly replaced by gasps of wonder as the organism made contact. I could feel each mind connecting, expanding, experiencing what Sarah and I had discovered. The sergeant's gun clattered to the ground as he stared at his hands, now covered in gently pulsing bioluminescent material. What is this? He whispered, his voice filled with awe rather than fear. Dr. Brenner stumbled slightly, overwhelmed by the sudden influx of sensation and information. It's incredible, she breathed. The complexity, the beauty of it all. For several minutes, the clearing was silent save for the soft pulsing of the organism. I could feel the shift in consciousness, the expansion of perception rippling through the group. Finally, Sarah spoke up, her voice filled with wonder. Amelia, this is amazing. But what happens now? Where do we go from here? It was the question I'd been pondering since my first contact with the organism. Now, with our expanded consciousness, the answer seemed clearer than ever. We evolve, I said simply. We learn. We grow. This organism, it's not just changing us physically. It's opening our minds to possibilities we never could have imagined before. Dr. Brenner nodded slowly, her scientific mind already racing with the implications. The advancements in medicine alone, diseases could be eradicated overnight. And the potential for space exploration, for adapting to new environments. Exactly, I agreed. But it goes beyond that. This organism, it's not just a tool or a symbiote. It's a bridge to each other, to our planet, maybe even to other forms of life out in the universe. The sergeant, who had been quiet since his initial contact, suddenly spoke up. I can feel it. The connections. It's like I can sense everyone here. Feel what they're feeling. That's just the beginning, I explained. As we learn to use these new abilities to truly integrate with the organism, our potential is limitless. But even as excitement and wonder spread through the group, I could sense an undercurrent of fear. It was Sarah who gave voice to it. Emilia, she said hesitantly, this is incredible, but what about the rest of the world? How will they react? This could cause panic on a global scale. I nodded, acknowledging the validity of her concern. You're right, which is why we need to approach this carefully. We can't just spring this on an unsuspecting world. Dr. Brenner, ever the pragmatist, chimed in. We need a plan, a way to introduce this gradually, to help people understand and accept it. Agreed, I said. But we also need to move quickly. The organism is still spreading, and it won't be long before its effects become noticeable to the outside world. As we discussed strategies, I became aware of a new sensation through my connection with the organism. A pulling, an urging towards something. Wait, I said, holding up a hand. Do you feel that? The others nodded, their faces a mixture of confusion and anticipation. Without a word, we began moving as one, following the organism's guidance through the glowing forest. After what seemed like hours but could have been minutes, we emerged from the tree line onto a high cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The sight that greeted us was breathtaking. The bioluminescent glow had spread across the water, creating a vast, pulsing network that stretched to the horizon. It was as if the stars had fallen into the sea, creating a mirror image of the night sky. It's beautiful, Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. But as we stood there, marveling at the sight, a new sound reached our ears, the whir of helicopter blades growing louder by the second. Looks like the outside world has noticed us, the sergeant said grimly. Dr. Brenner turned to me, her face etched with concern. Emilia, what do we do? We're not ready to reveal this to the world yet. I closed my eyes, communing with the organism. When I opened them again, I knew what had to be done. We're not retreating, I said firmly. But we're not fighting either. It's time to show the world what we've discovered, to extend an invitation to all of humanity. As the helicopters appeared on the horizon, their searchlights cutting through the night, the organism began to move. Tendrils of glowing material rose from the sea, intertwining and solidifying to form a bridge, a pathway leading from the cliff to a small island barely visible in the distance. That's our path forward, I said, gesturing to the bioluminescent bridge, a symbol of the journey humanity is about to embark on. Sarah squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and excitement. Together? I nodded, smiling at my friend and colleague who had been through so much with me. Together. As we stepped onto the glowing bridge, I could hear the shouts from the helicopters, see the astonished faces of the pilots as they witnessed the impossible scene below them. Our small group moved forward, each step taking us further from the world we knew, and closer to an uncertain but thrilling future. The organism pulsed beneath our feet, around us, within us, a constant reminder of the incredible journey we had begun. As we neared the island, I turned back to look at the mainland. The glow of the organism had spread further, a beacon of change visible for miles. I knew that in the coming days, weeks, and months, the world would be transformed in ways we could scarcely imagine. There would be fear, resistance, and conflict. But there would also be wonder, discovery, and a chance for humanity to transcend its limitations. As we set foot on the island, our new home and the base from which we would help guide humanity's evolution, I felt a profound sense of purpose. The final stand hadn't been a battle, but a rebirth, and it was only the beginning. "Welcome," I said to my companions, gesturing to the bioluminescent landscape around us, "to the dawn of a new era." The organism pulsed in agreement, its glow a promise of the wonders and challenges that lay ahead. As the first light of dawn began to break on the horizon, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The adventure we had begun in a simple Oregon forest had led us to the threshold of humanity's next great leap forward, and we were ready to take that leap together into a future bright with possibility. The salty sea breeze whipped through my hair as I stood on the shore of our small island refuge. Sarah stood beside me, her eyes fixed on the mainland coastline now completely overtaken by the iridescent green moss. The forest we once knew had transformed into an alien landscape, pulsing with life and mystery. "Do you think we made the right choice?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible above the crashing waves. I turned to face her, noticing the flecks of moss that had begun to grow on her skin, a mirror of my own transformation. "I don't know if there was a right choice, Sarah, but I do know we couldn't let the government weaponize it. This symbiosis, it's our best chance to understand and coexist." As if in response to my words, the moss on my arm rippled, sending a wave of warmth through my body. Over the past few days, we had begun to notice changes in ourselves, enhanced strength, accelerated healing, and most intriguingly, a growing ability to communicate with the moss itself. Sarah nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's strange, isn't it? A week ago, we were running for our lives from this stuff. Now I can't imagine being without it." We made our way back to the makeshift shelter we'd constructed from driftwood and the few supplies we'd managed to bring with us. The moss had been surprisingly helpful, weaving itself into the structure to provide additional support and insulation. As we sat down to our meager dinner of foraged berries and fish, I couldn't help but marvel at how quickly our lives had changed. "We need to start thinking about the future," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. Sarah looked up from her plate, curiosity glinting in her eyes. "What do you mean?" I gestured towards the mainland. "We can't stay on this island forever. Sooner or later, we'll need to make contact with the outside world. We need to be prepared for their reaction." "You think they'll see us as a threat?" Sarah said. It wasn't a question. I nodded grimly. "Can you blame them? We've essentially become hosts to an alien life form that's taken over an entire forest. They'll either want to study us or eliminate us." Sarah's expression hardened. "Then we need to show them that we're not a threat, that this symbiosis could be beneficial for humanity." As if in response to our conversation, I felt a gentle tugging sensation in my mind. Over the past few days, we'd learned that this was how the moss communicated with us. I closed my eyes, focusing on the sensation. Images flashed through my mind. Vast networks of roots and fungi, ecosystems thriving in perfect balance, the rapid healing of damaged environments. The moss was showing us its purpose, its potential. "Sarah," I gasped, opening my eyes. "I think I understand now. The moss, it's not just a single organism. It's a collective, a network designed to heal and balance ecosystems." Sarah's eyes widened. "Like a biological supercomputer?" I nodded excitedly. "Exactly. And we're not just hosts, we're interfaces. We can communicate with it, direct it, work with it to restore damaged environments." As the implications of this revelation sank in, we spent the next few hours discussing how we could use this knowledge to our advantage. By the time we finally went to sleep, we had the beginnings of a plan. The next morning, we stood at the edge of the island ready to put our plan into action. The moss had formed a bridge for us once before, and we hoped it would do so again. "Are you ready?" I asked Sarah, trying to keep the nervousness out of my voice. She took a deep breath and nodded. As ready as I'll ever be. Together we focused our thoughts on the moss, visualizing a bridge connecting our island to the mainland. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly but surely, the water began to ripple and churn. A tendril of moss rose from the waves, followed by another, and another. They intertwined and expanded, forming a solid pathway across the water. Sarah laughed in disbelief, the sound filled with equal parts joy and trepidation. "It worked," she exclaimed, squeezing my hand. I grinned back at her. Let's hope the rest of our plan goes this smoothly. As we stepped onto the moss bridge, I couldn't help but marvel at the strength and flexibility beneath our feet. It felt alive, responsive to our movements in a way that both thrilled and unnerved me. We made our way across the water, our footsteps sure and steady. As we neared the mainland, we could see figures moving on the shore, people in hazmat suits, their faces obscured behind masks. "Looks like we've been spotted," Sarah murmured. I nodded, trying to quell the fear rising in my chest. "Remember the plan. We're not here to fight. We're here to demonstrate and negotiate." As we stepped onto the shore, we were immediately surrounded by armed guards. A man in a more elaborate suit stepped forward, his voice muffled by his mask. "Dr. Thompson, Dr. Chen, by the authority of the United States government, you are hereby detained for quarantine and questioning." I raised my hand slowly, making sure they could see the moss growing on my skin. "We understand your concerns, but we're not here as a threat. We're here to help." The man tilted his head, curiosity evident in his posture. "Help? You've been infected by an alien organism that's overtaking our forests. How exactly do you propose to help?" Sarah stepped forward, her voice calm and steady. "The moss isn't an infection, it's a symbiote, and it has the potential to revolutionize environmental restoration and medical science." To demonstrate, Sarah focused her thoughts, and the moss on her arm began to grow and shape itself into complex patterns. The soldiers stepped back in alarm, but the lead scientist leaned in, fascinated. "Incredible," he breathed. "You can control it?" I nodded. "Not just control it, communicate with it, work with it. This organism isn't a threat to humanity. It's an opportunity." Over the next few hours, we demonstrated the moss's abilities, its rapid growth and adaptation, its ability to purify water and soil, and most impressively, its potential for accelerated healing. We showed them how the moss had enhanced our own physical abilities and cognitive functions. As the sun began to set, the initial fear and hostility had given way to cautious curiosity. The lead scientist, who had introduced himself as Dr. Emerson, removed his mask, his eyes shining with excitement. "This is unprecedented," he said, shaking his head in wonder. "The potential applications are staggering, but there are so many questions, so many unknowns." I smiled, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. "That's why we're here, Dr. Emerson. To find answers, to explore the potential of this symbiosis. But we need your help." Sarah nodded in agreement. We're standing at the threshold of a new era in human evolution. The question is, are we brave enough to take that step? As we looked out over the moss-covered forest, now bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, I felt a sense of purpose and possibility that I had never experienced before. The moss thrummed with life beneath our feet, a constant reminder of the incredible journey we had embarked upon. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles we might face, I knew that we were no longer alone. We were part of something larger, something with the potential to change the world. And as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I couldn't help but feel that this was not an end, but a beginning. The dawn of a new symbiosis between humanity and the natural world.